The moment I walked into that kitchen, my heart stopped. My 10-year-old son stood at the sink, his small hands red and raw from hot water scrubbing dishes, while laughter echoed from the dining room. Through the doorway, I could see my sister's children at the main table eating the $5,000 Christmas dinner I paid for. And my boy. He was eating cold leftovers off a paper plate on the counter. "Grandma said I had to earn my seat," Luke whispered, not meeting my eyes. Something inside me shattered, because 25 years ago I was that child at the sink. I was the one eating scraps while my sister got the feast. I escaped this family at 18 and built an empire from nothing. But they hadn't changed. They'd just found a new victim. My mother appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "If Luke wants real food, he needs real accomplishments." I looked at my son, then at her. Then I zipped his jacket, took his hand, and walked out without a word. What happened next, I cut them from the family trust before sunrise. 30 minutes later, my father called, begging for money. By nightfall, my mother had left 89 voicemails. But that was just the beginning. Because what I discovered in the weeks that followed, the stolen inheritance, the hidden scholarship, the secrets my grandmother took to her grave, would burn their perfect family image to the ground. They thought I was the weak one, the forgettable daughter, the walking ATM. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Stay with me. This story has twists you won't see coming, and an ending that will make every second worth it. My name is Caitlin Reed. I am 38 years old, and I own a lifestyle brand company that I built from absolutely nothing. No investors, no family money, no safety net. Everything I have I earned with my own 2 hands, my own sleepless nights, and my own stubborn refusal to become what my family always told me I would be: a disappointment. The morning of December 23rd started like any other winter morning in my life, now organized, controlled, and carefully planned. My suitcases were packed the night before. Luke's favorite snacks were already in a cooler in the trunk. The GPS was programmed, the house was locked, and my assistant had strict instructions not to contact me unless the building was literally on fire. I had thought of everything. What I had not thought of, what I could never quite prepare for, was the feeling that crept into my chest as I pulled out of my driveway and pointed the car toward my hometown. It was a feeling I had spent 20 years trying to outrun, a tightness that started somewhere behind my ribs and spread slowly like ink in water until my whole body felt heavy with it. I glanced in the rearview mirror at Luke, who was already absorbed in a book about space exploration. 10 years old, with his father's dark hair and my stubborn chin, he was the kind of child who noticed everything and judged nothing. He saw the best in people even when they did not deserve it. Especially when they did not deserve it. "Mom," he said without looking up from his book, "do you think Grandma will make cookies like in the movies where everyone decorates them together?" I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "I don't know, sweetheart. We'll see." "I hope so," he continued, finally looking up with those earnest brown eyes. "I want to meet my cousins properly this time. Last time we visited, I was only 5. I barely remember it. I remembered it perfectly. I remembered my mother commenting on my weight within 10 minutes of arrival. I remembered my sister Molly holding court at the dinner table while I sat at the edge, invisible. I remembered leaving 2 days early and crying the entire drive home while Luke slept peacefully in his car seat, too young to understand why his mother was falling apart. That was 5 years ago. I had not been back since. So why was I going back now? The honest answer was complicated. Part of me wanted to believe that people could change, that 5 years was enough time for my parents to realize they had 2 daughters, not just one. But the bigger part of me, the part that made this decision, was sitting in the back seat asking about Christmas cookies. Luke deserved to know his family, even if that family had never made much effort to know him. He deserved the chance to have grandparents who baked with him, cousins who played with him, a big, noisy holiday like the ones he saw in movies and read about in books. I wanted to give him the Christmas I never had. And if that meant swallowing my pride and walking back into a house full of people who had spent my entire childhood making me feel small, then that was what I would do. For him. Only for him. We stopped for gas about an hour outside of town, and I was stretching my legs beside the pump when a familiar voice called my name. "Caitlin, Caitlin Reed." I turned to find Eleanor Patterson walking toward me, bundled in a wool coat that looked older than I was, her white hair pinned back in the same simple style she had worn for as long as I could remember. Eleanor had been our neighbor when I was growing up, her house just across the fence from ours. She had watched me ride my first bicycle, had bandaged my knee when I fell off, it had slipped me books and cookies when my own mother was too busy fussing over Molly to notice I existed. "Eleanor," I said, genuinely surprised, "what are you doing all the way out here?" "Visiting my sister in Riverside," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lavender and old paper. "But look at you, successful businesswoman. I read about you in the magazine last month. Your grandmother would be so proud." The mention of my grandmother sent a sharp pang through my chest. She had passed away when I was 16, and I still missed her with an ache that time had never quite softened. She was the only person in my family who had ever made me feel seen, truly seen, and losing her had been like losing the only light in a very dark house. "Thank you," I managed. "That means a lot." Eleanor's expression shifted then, becoming serious, in a way that made me pay closer attention. She glanced toward my car where Luke was visible through the window, still reading his book. "You're going home for Christmas," she said. It was not a question. "Luke wants a real family holiday." Eleanor nodded slowly, but something flickered in her eyes, concern maybe, or warning. "Your grandmother used to worry about you, you know. About what that house did to you. She talked to me about it often toward the end." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. "Some patterns repeat generation after generation," Eleanor continued, her voice soft but firm. "The same cruelties, the same favoritism passed down like heirlooms nobody asked for. Unless someone is brave enough to break them." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "You were always brave, Caitlin. Even when you were too young to know it. Just remember that." I carried her words with me for the rest of the drive, turning them over in my mind like stones in my pocket. Patterns, generations, bravery. I did not fully understand what she meant, not then. I thought I was simply going home for Christmas, armed with my success and my boundaries and my determination to give Luke a good holiday. But nothing, not my success, not my preparation, not Eleanor's warning could have prepared me for what I walked into that night. We arrived at my parents' house just as the sun was setting on Christmas Eve, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made the old Victorian look almost welcoming. Almost. Luke pressed his face against the car window, taking in the wreaths on the door, the lights strung along the porch railing, the giant inflatable snowman swaying gently in the front yard. "It looks like a Christmas card," he whispered, and I could hear the wonder in his voice. I wished I could see it through his eyes. All I could see was the house where I had learned that love was conditional, that approval had to be earned, and that some children were simply worth more than others. 2 weeks before this moment, my mother had called me. This was unusual in itself. She typically only reached out when she needed something, and even then the calls were brief and transactional. But this call had been different. Her voice had been warm, almost sweet, as she explained that she wanted this Christmas to be special. The whole family together, a catered dinner, beautiful decorations, gifts for all the grandchildren. It would be magical, she said. It would be the kind of Christmas we had never had before. Then came the request. Could I help make it happen? Could I fund the dinner, the decorations, the gifts? She mentioned a number $5,000 as casually as if she were asking me to pick up a gallon of milk. I said yes. Of course I said yes. Some desperate, foolish part of me believed that this might finally be the gesture that earned me a place in my own family. If I could make their Christmas magical, maybe they would finally see me. Maybe they would finally acknowledge that I existed, that I mattered, that I was more than just the daughter who left and never quite fit in when she came back. Standing in the foyer now, surrounded by the decorations my money had purchased, watching my family bustle around preparations for the dinner my money had funded, I understood how naive that hope had been. My mother greeted me with a distracted hug that lasted approximately 2 seconds. "Oh, good you're here. Caitlin, can you help Molly set the table? We're running behind." No thank you for the $5,000. No acknowledgement that the catered feast currently warming in the kitchen existed because of my generosity. Just an instruction to help as if I were staff rather than family. Molly appeared from the dining room looking effortlessly put together in a cashmere sweater and perfectly applied makeup. My older sister had always had a talent for looking like she belonged in photographs and conversations in our parents' affections. At 42, she had only refined that talent further. "Caitlin," she said, offering me the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You made it. Mom was worried you'd cancel again." I had never canceled a family visit in my life. I had simply stopped being invited. The evening unfolded exactly as I should have expected. Dinner was served at the long mahogany table that had been in our family for generations, and Molly naturally took her place at our mother's right hand, her husband Derek beside her, their 3 children arranged like perfect accessories around them. Tyler was 14, Madison 12, and little Emma 8, all of them well-dressed, well-behaved, and clearly accustomed to being the center of attention. When I moved toward the empty chairs at the main table with Luke, my mother intercepted us. "Oh, Caitlin, I thought Luke might be more comfortable at the side table, with the extra chairs. You know how kids are, they like their own space." I looked at the main table. I counted the chairs. There were 2 empty seats, more than enough room for Luke and me both. "There seems to be plenty of room," I said carefully. My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Those are for later, in case anyone needs to move around. Luke will be fine over there, won't you, sweetheart?" Luke looked up at me with confusion in his eyes. "But I wanted to sit with my cousins," he said quietly. "There's not enough room, dear," my mother repeated already, steering him toward the small table in the corner, the one usually reserved for folding laundry or holding overflow dishes. "You'll be able to see everyone from there." I watched my son settle into his exile, and something cold and familiar settled into my chest. I knew this feeling. I had lived this feeling for 18 years, sitting at the edges of my own family watching Molly shine while I faded into the background. Now my son was experiencing it too, and the realization made me want to scream. Instead, I sat down at the main table in one of those supposedly unavailable chairs and tried to focus on the meal. Molly dominated the conversation as she always did. She talked about Tyler's grades, Madison's dance recitals, Emma's adorable observations about the world. She talked about the sacrifices she made caring for our aging parents, conveniently ignoring the fact that I sent money every month to cover their property taxes and medical expenses. She talked about her home decor boutique Magnolia Lane and how business was booming. What she did not mention was that I had been quietly referring my wealthy clients to her shop for years. Every time a colleague asked where to find unique home accessories, I mentioned Molly's store. Every time a business contact needed gifts for their wife, I suggested Magnolia Lane. I had never told Molly I was doing this, and she had clearly never figured it out. She believed her success was entirely her own, built on her own talent and hard work. She had no idea that her little sister was the invisible foundation holding it all up. My father raised his glass for a toast. "To family," he said, beaming at the table, "and to everyone who made this wonderful evening possible." Everyone. Not me specifically. Just everyone. I had written a $5,000 check to make this dinner happen, and I did not even warrant a mention. I pushed food around my plate and watched Luke at his small table eating quietly, glancing over at his cousins with longing in his eyes. I told myself it was fine. It was just one dinner. Tomorrow we would open presents and maybe things would be different. Maybe my parents would see Luke, really see him, and realize that he was just as worthy of their love as Molly's children. I was trying to convince myself it was fine when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Luke was nowhere in sight. His chair at the side table was empty. His plate sat abandoned, the food barely touched. I scanned the dining room quickly, my eyes moving from face to face, but Luke was not among them. Molly's children were all accounted for. Tyler slouched in an armchair, staring at his phone, Madison and Emma whispering together on the sofa. My parents sat in their usual spots, nursing glasses of wine, looking perfectly content. But my son was gone. I excused myself from the table, though I doubt anyone noticed. The hallway was quiet, the bathroom door open and dark inside. I checked the living room, the front porch, the small study where my father kept his books. Nothing. My heart began to beat faster, that primal parental fear rising in my throat. Where was he? Then I heard it. A small sound almost lost beneath the music and conversation drifting from the dining room. The sound of running water and the clatter of dishes. I walked toward the kitchen, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor, and what I saw when I reached the doorway stopped me cold. Luke stood on a step stool at the sink, his sleeves pushed up past his elbows, his small hands submerged in water that steamed in the cool kitchen air. He was scrubbing a pot that was nearly as big as his torso, his thin arms straining with the effort. Soap bubbles clung to his forearms, and even from across the room, I could see that his hands were red. Irritated from the hot water and the harsh dish soap my mother had always insisted on using. He had not seen me yet. His attention was focused entirely on his task, his little face set in concentration, determined to do a good job. My 10-year-old son washing pots and pans at a Christmas party while the adults laughed in the next room and his cousins played video games. "Luke," my voice came out strange, strangled. "What are you doing?" He looked up, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Was it guilt? Embarrassment before his expression settled into something that broke my heart even more. Acceptance. "Grandma said everyone needs to contribute," he explained, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the world. "Cousin Tyler told me I should help since I'm the youngest. He said that's how it works in this family." Tyler, 14 years old, currently sprawled on the living room couch, scrolling through social media, who had apparently decided that my son should be the family servant while he relaxed. I thought about Tyler at the dinner table being served seconds by my mother, laughing at my father's jokes, completely at ease in his position as the favored grandchild. And here was Luke, banished to the kitchen with a pile of dirty dishes and a lie about family contribution. I moved closer, and that was when I saw the plate. It sat on the counter beside him, pushed to the side to make room for the dish rack. On it was a small pile of food that made my stomach turn. Dried out scraps of turkey, the dark meat that nobody else wanted. A dinner roll that had clearly been sitting out for hours, its surface hard and cracked. A smear of gravy that had long since congealed into something gelatinous and unappetizing. This was what my son had been given to eat, while Molly's children enjoyed the catered feast I had paid for. "Grandma said dinner was for people who finished their work," Luke said, following my gaze to the plate. "So I'm trying to finish fast, so maybe I can have some pie later." Something cracked open inside me. Not broke, cracked like ice on a frozen lake, revealing dark water beneath. Because I knew this scene. I knew it in my bones, in my blood, in every cell of my body. I had lived this scene. I was 8 years old, standing at this same sink, this exact sink during Christmas dinner. The family was in the other room, opening presents, and I could hear Molly's delighted squeals as she unwrapped gift after gift. But I was not with them. I was in the kitchen, my hands burning from hot water scrubbing dishes that seemed to multiply no matter how fast I worked. My mother had told me the same thing she apparently told Luke tonight: everyone needs to contribute. What she meant was that I needed to contribute. Molly never washed a dish in her life. I remembered the leftover plate, too. The scraps of food that nobody else wanted pushed toward me like an afterthought. I remembered eating alone at this counter, listening to my family celebrate without me wondering what I had done wrong to deserve this exile. I was too young then to understand that I had done nothing wrong. Some children are simply chosen to be less than, and I was one of them. 25 years had passed since that Christmas. I had built a company from nothing. I had raised a child on my own. I had become successful beyond anything my family ever expected or wanted for me. And none of it mattered, because here I was again watching history repeat itself with a new victim. They had simply replaced me with my son. Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. Some patterns repeat generation after generation, unless someone is brave enough to break them. I looked through the kitchen doorway into the dining room beyond. I could see Molly's children gathered around my mother, who was serving them slices of pie with whipped cream and chocolate shavings. Madison was laughing at something, and my mother was smiling down at her with an expression I had never once seen directed at me. Pure, uncomplicated love. The kind of love I had spent my childhood aching for and never received. That love was being given freely to Molly's children while my son stood at the sink with raw hands and cold leftovers. The crack inside me widened. I felt something shifting, something fundamental changing in the core of who I was. For 20 years I had kept my silence. I had accepted my role as the forgotten daughter, the family ATM, the one who gave and never received anything in return. I had told myself that keeping the peace was more important than my own dignity. I had swallowed my pain and smiled through holidays and pretended that everything was fine. But this was not fine. This would never be fine. My son would not grow up the way I did. He would not learn that his worth was less than his cousins. He would not stand at sinks and eat scraps and wonder why he was not good enough to be loved. I reached for Luke, ready to pull him away from that sink, ready to take him out of this house, and never look back. I was about to take Luke and leave when my mother appeared in the doorway and said the sentence that finally shattered 20 years of silence. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, her expression one of mild irritation rather than concern. She looked at the scene before her, her grandson at the sink, her daughter reaching for him, and I watched her face arrange itself into something cold and dismissive. There was no guilt in her eyes, no recognition that anything was wrong. She saw exactly what she intended to see a child who had not yet earned his place. "If Luke wants to eat at the real table," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone I remembered from childhood, the one that pretended to be reasonable while delivering cruelty, "he needs to earn it with real accomplishments. Unlike some people, we don't reward mediocrity in this family." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were surprising. Nothing my mother said could truly surprise me anymore, but because they were so terribly, painfully familiar. I had heard these exact words before. I had been standing in this exact kitchen at this exact sink, and my mother had looked down at me with this exact expression. I was 10 years old. It was Thanksgiving, and I had asked why I could not sit at the main table with Molly and the grown-ups. My mother had sighed with exasperation and delivered her verdict, "You're not accomplished enough for the main table, Caitlin. When you have something worth celebrating, you can sit with the family." I had spent the rest of that Thanksgiving eating in the kitchen alone, wondering what I needed to accomplish to be worthy of a seat at my own family's table. I never did figure it out. No achievement was ever enough. No success ever counted. I graduated high school with honors. Molly had barely graduated at all, but Molly still sat at the main table while I helped serve the food. I started my own business, built it into something real, became more financially successful than anyone else in my family, and still I was the forgotten daughter, the one whose contributions went unacknowledged, the one who funded Christmas dinners without even a mention in the toast. And now here was my mother speaking the same poisonous words to my son. The pattern was not just repeating. It was being deliberately recreated, passed down like a family heirloom of cruelty, and Luke was the new recipient. I opened my mouth to respond, to finally say all the things I had swallowed for 20 years, but before I could speak, something unexpected happened. Luke set down the dish towel. He turned off the water, dried his red hands on his pants, and stepped down from the stool. Then he looked directly at my mother. This small boy facing down the woman who had terrorized me my entire life. And when he spoke, his voice shook but did not break. "My mom works harder than anyone in this house." The words came out clear and steady, each one chosen with care. "She built her company by herself. Nobody helped her. Nobody gave her anything. He took a breath and I saw his hands trembling at his sides, but he did not stop. She's the one who paid for everything tonight. The food, the decorations, everything. And she's the only person here who actually loves me. The kitchen went silent. From the dining room I could still hear the distant murmur of conversation, but here in this small space the air itself seemed to have stopped moving. My mother stared at Luke as if she had never truly seen him before, as if he had transformed from a piece of furniture into something unexpected and unwelcome. Then her face twisted with anger. "This is what happens when you raise a child without proper discipline," she said, turning her glare to me. "No father, no structure, just running wild with whatever thoughts pop into his head. He has no respect, Caitlin. No understanding of how families work." Something clicked into place inside me. Not the cracking I had felt before, but something harder, something final. I looked at my mother, and I saw her clearly, perhaps for the first time in my life. She was not a complicated woman. She was not misunderstood. She was simply cruel, and she had been cruel for so long that she no longer recognized it as cruelty. She thought this was normal. She thought this was how families worked. I took Luke's hand. His small fingers wrapped around mine, still slightly damp from the dishwater, and I felt the rightness of what I was about to do settle into my bones. "No," I said. My voice was calm, calmer than I expected. "This is what happens when you raise a child with love. Something you wouldn't recognize." I did not wait for her response. I did not look back to see her expression. I walked out of that kitchen holding my son's hand, collected our coats from the front closet, and opened the door onto a Christmas Eve that had turned cold and white with falling snow. Behind me, I heard my father call out in confusion, heard Molly asking what was happening, heard my mother's voice rising in indignation. I heard all of it, and I kept walking. The car was freezing, but I did not care. I turned on the engine, cranked up the heat, and pulled out of the driveway while Luke buckled himself into the back seat. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say, not yet. The snow fell thick and silent around us as I drove toward the nearest hotel, away from that house, away from that family, away from everything I had spent 20 years pretending I could tolerate. Luke fell asleep somewhere on the highway, his head resting against the window, his face soft and untroubled, in a way that only sleeping children can manage. I watched him in the rearview mirror and felt my heart crack open with love for this boy who had defended me when I could not defend myself. He was 10 years old, and he had done what I had never been able to do. He had stood up and told the truth. Eleanor's words drifted through my mind again, soft as the snow falling outside. Some patterns repeat, generation after generation, unless someone is brave enough to break them. Walking away was not enough. I had walked away at 18, and what had changed? Nothing. The pattern continued. My parents found new targets for their cruelty, new ways to divide the worthy from the unworthy. If I simply left again, they would go on as they always had. They would tell themselves that I was the problem, that I was too sensitive, that I had overreacted. They would rewrite history until they were the victims and I was the ungrateful daughter who ruined Christmas. No, this time would be different. This time, I would not just escape. I would ensure that they could never hurt Luke, never hurt me, never hurt anyone else this way again. I would dismantle the structures that gave them power. I would take away the tools they used to wound. By the time I pulled into the hotel parking lot, I knew exactly what I needed to do. That night, I made a promise to my sleeping son. They would learn what their cruelty had cost them. And tomorrow, the lessons would begin. Luke and I spent Christmas Day in the hotel room ordering room service and watching movies on the small television mounted to the wall. We did not talk about what had happened at my parents' house. We did not talk about grandparents or cousins or cold leftovers. Instead, we built a blanket fort between the two beds and pretended we were explorers camping in the wilderness, Luke laughed more that day than he had during the entire visit to my family, and I realized with a pang that this simple, quiet, loving day was the Christmas I had always wanted to give him. Not the big house or the fancy dinner or the extended family gathered around a table. Just the two of us, safe and warm and together. But beneath the blanket forts and the laughter, my mind was working. Planning. Preparing. The morning of December 26th arrived gray and cold snow still falling softly outside our window. Luke was still asleep, his face peaceful against the pillow, when I sat down at the small desk in the corner of the room and opened my laptop. I had work to do. The trust fund documents were stored in my secure cloud folder, organized meticulously the way I organized everything in my life. I opened them now and began to read, really read for the first time in years. The Reed Family Trust, I had called it. Established 5 years ago, shortly after I sold my first company for a profit that still sometimes seemed unreal. I had created this trust out of guilt, out of some desperate hope that if I could provide for my family financially, they might finally accept me emotionally. The numbers stared back at me from the screen. $180,000. That was the current value of the fund, built up over years of contributions that I made automatically without thinking, the same way I paid my electric bill or my mortgage. The trust covered my parents' property taxes, nearly $8,000 a year, that they never had to worry about. It provided an emergency cushion for unexpected expenses, which my mother had dipped into 3 times in the past 2 years. For things that were not remotely emergencies: a new refrigerator, a vacation to Florida, repairs to the deck that had been falling apart since I was a teenager. And it included provisions for education funds for the grandchildren. All of the grandchildren, including Luke. Though somehow I doubted my parents had ever planned to actually use that money for my son's benefit. I had created this trust, believing that financial support might earn me emotional acceptance. I had been paying essentially for the privilege of being part of a family that did not want me. Rent for a seat at a table that was never actually offered. And what had I received in return? Cold leftovers for my son. The same cruelty that had defined my childhood, recycled for a new generation. The fund did not buy love. It bought comfortable contempt. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Richard answered on the second ring, his voice professional despite the early hour and the holiday week. I explained what I wanted: full removal of all current beneficiaries from the trust effective immediately. I wanted the trust restructured with only Luke as the beneficiary. I wanted notifications sent automatically to everyone who had been removed per the standard protocol, and I wanted it done today. Richard asked if I was certain. I told him I had never been more certain of anything in my life. The phone call lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes to undo 5 years of misplaced generosity, 5 years of hoping that money could buy what should have been freely given. When I hung up, I felt something I had not expected: lightness. A strange, unfamiliar sensation of weight lifting from my shoulders. For a lifetime I had said yes to my family. Yes, I will fund the dinner. Yes, I will cover the taxes. Yes, I will help with the emergency that is not really an emergency. Yes, 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 until I had forgotten that no was even an option. Now, I had said no. And the world had not ended. The sky had not fallen. I was still here, still breathing, still whole. Perhaps more whole than I had been in years. But I was not finished. I opened my banking app and began to review every automatic payment, every subscription, every small monthly charge that I had set up over the years to help my family without them having to ask. My parents' streaming services, 3 different platforms because my mother liked variety, totaling $47 a month. Molly's warehouse storage fees for her boutique inventory, $120 a month, which I had offered to cover temporarily 2 years ago and somehow never stopped paying. The quarterly gift that funded my father's golf club membership, $300 every 3 months, because he once mentioned in passing that the fees were a burden, and I, foolish as always, had rushed to ease that burden. The small helps added up. $412 every month flowing out of my accounts and into the comfortable lives of people who had never once thanked me for it. I doubted they even knew where the money came from. They probably assumed these things were simply handled the way privileged people assume that bills get paid and services continue without effort. They had no idea that their forgotten daughter was quietly subsidizing their existence. One by one, I canceled them all. The streaming services, the storage fees, the golf club, every automatic payment, every standing order, every invisible thread of financial support that had connected me to a family that did not deserve it. Each cancellation felt like cutting a rope that had been slowly strangling me. By the time I finished, I was breathing easier than I had in years. My phone sat silent on the desk beside me. No calls yet. No frantic texts. The notifications had been sent, but my family was probably still sleeping off their Christmas excess, unaware that their financial safety net had just been pulled away. They would find out soon enough. When the property tax bill arrived and no one paid it. When the streaming services stopped working. When the golf club sent a polite reminder about overdue fees. They would notice. And they would call. For now, the silence felt like peace. I sat in the gray morning light watching Luke sleep and allowed myself a moment of something that might have been satisfaction. I had taken the first step. There would be more to come, I knew. This was not over, it was barely beginning, but for the first time in my life, I was not the one being acted upon. I was the one acting. 37 minutes after the trust notification was sent, my father's name appeared on my phone. The performance was about to begin. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. Not because I was busy. Luke was still sleeping, and I had nothing to do but wait, but because I wanted a moment to prepare myself. I knew exactly why my father was calling. The only question was how long it would take him to get to the point. "Caitlin, sweetheart." His voice was warm in a way I barely recognized. My father was not a warm man. He was distant, passive, a shadow who moved through rooms without leaving an impression. In my entire childhood, I could count on one hand the number of times he had called me sweetheart. "I've been thinking about you. How are you? How's my grandson doing?" My grandson. As if he had ever shown the slightest interest in Luke. As if he had not sat silently at that dinner table while his grandson was banished to a corner eating scraps. The sudden concern was so transparently false that I almost laughed. "We're fine, Dad." "Good, good. That's wonderful to hear." He paused and I could almost hear him searching for the next line in his script. "Listen, I wanted to apologize for how things went on Christmas Eve. Your mother can be a little intense sometimes, you know how she is. We all could have handled things better." This was new. My father had never apologized for anything in his life, not genuinely. The fact that he was attempting it now told me everything I needed to know about how seriously the trust notification had shaken them. "I appreciate that, Dad. Family is important." He continued, his voice taking on a philosophical tone that did not suit him. "We shouldn't let little misunderstandings come between us. Blood is blood, right?" I said nothing. I knew if I waited long enough he would get to the real reason for this call. The warmth, the apology, the sudden interest in my well-being, these were all preamble. My father had not called to reconnect. He had called because his comfortable life had just developed an unexpected complication and he needed it fixed. It took less than 2 minutes. "Listen, sweetheart, while I have you on the phone." His voice shifted, becoming more casual, as if what he was about to say was merely an afterthought. "Your mother and I have hit a small, rough patch. Nothing serious, just some unexpected expenses coming up. You know how it is around the holidays, everything adds up." "What kind of expenses?" "Oh, just bills, you know how it goes. The usual things." He laughed, a forced sound that grated against my ears. "We could use about $2,500 to get through the month, just until things settle down." $2,500. The number was specific enough to sound calculated, round enough to sound casual. I knew my parents' financial situation better than they probably realized. Their mortgage was nearly paid off. They had refinanced twice, both times using money I had given them for the down payments. Their monthly expenses were minimal. My mother's pension from her years as a school secretary combined with my father's Social Security more than covered their basic needs. What they could not cover was the lifestyle they had grown accustomed to. The golf club membership, the weekly dinners at the country club restaurant, the vacations they took twice a year, always to places more expensive than they could actually afford. These were the expenses they were worried about, not bills, not necessities, but the comfortable extras that had been quietly subsidized by their forgotten daughter for years. What specifically is the money for Dad? His voice tightened almost imperceptibly. I told you just bills. Things add up. You don't need a detailed breakdown, do you? I'm just trying to understand the situation. The situation is that we need a little help. The warmth was fading now, replaced by something harder. That's what family does, Caitlin. We help each other. I let silence hang between us for a moment before responding. Have you asked Molly? The change was immediate. Whatever performance he had been maintaining dropped away, and I heard the real man beneath, irritated, entitled, incredulous that I would even suggest such a thing. Molly has her own struggles, he said flatly. Her business is going through a tough time. Derek's job isn't as stable as they'd like. They can't afford to help right now. And you assume I can? You're the one with money, Caitlin. Everyone knows that. You built that company, sold it, started another one. You have resources. Family helps family, especially when they're able to. The entitlement in his voice was breathtaking. Not a question, not a request, an assumption. I had money, therefore I should give it to them. My success existed in his mind primarily as a resource for the family to draw upon. Not something to be proud of. Not an accomplishment to celebrate. Just a well that never ran dry, always available when they needed to dip their bucket. I'm reassessing all my financial commitments right now, I said, keeping my voice calm and even. I won't be able to help. Silence. Then, what do you mean reassessing? I mean that I'm looking at where my money goes and making changes. The trust, the monthly payments, all of it. I need to focus on my own priorities. His response cycled through emotions so quickly I could practically hear the gears turning. First came guilt. After everything we've done for you, Caitlin, we raised you, gave you a home, supported you through everything. Then minimization. It's not like you can't afford it. $2,500 is nothing to someone like you. You probably spend that much on groceries. And finally, when neither of those worked, anger. You've always thought you were better than us. Ever since you left, you've looked down on this family. Now you're too good to help your own parents. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my daughter has decided that her family isn't worth her precious time or money anymore. I could have explained. I could have told him about Luke at the sink, about the cold leftovers, about 20 years of being treated as an ATM with legs rather than a daughter worthy of love. But I knew it would not matter. He would not understand because he had never tried to understand. To him, I existed to provide. That was my role, my function, the only value I had ever held in this family. I'm sorry you see it that way, Dad. Your mother is very upset. He said, his voice dropping into something that sounded almost like a threat. You know how she gets. This is going to cause problems, Caitlin. Serious problems. It already has, Dad. That's why we're here. I ended the call before he could respond. My hands were steady. My heart was calm. I had expected this conversation, prepared for it, and it had gone exactly as I anticipated. No surprises, no revelations, just confirmation of everything I already knew. My father did not see me as a daughter. He saw me as a resource, and resources that stopped producing were problems to be solved. I set my phone on the desk and turned to check on Luke, who was beginning to stir in his bed. The day stretched ahead of us, quiet and peaceful in our little hotel room, but I knew the peace would not last. My father's call had been the opening salvo. My mother would not be far behind. By nightfall, my phone showed 89 missed calls from my mother, 42 text messages, and 17 voicemails. The first one started with crying. The last one started with threats. I did not listen to the messages right away. For the first 2 days, I let them accumulate, watching the numbers climb on my phone's notification screen like a steadily rising flood. 89 became 112. 112 became 143. The texts multiplied alongside them, a parallel avalanche of words I was not yet ready to face. Luke and I stayed in the hotel, then drove home on the 28th, and still I did not listen. I needed distance first. I needed to be in my own space, surrounded by my own things, before I could stomach what I knew those messages would contain. On New Year's Eve, while Luke was at a sleepover with his best friend, I finally sat down with a notebook and my phone. I wanted to document this. I wanted to see the pattern laid out clearly in black and white so that I could never again convince myself that I was imagining things or being too sensitive. Day 1, December 26th. My mother's voice came through the speaker, thick with tears. "Caitlin, I don't understand what's happening. Why would you do this to us? Please call me back. We're your parents. Whatever is going on, we can work it out. Just call me." The message ended with a sob that sounded almost genuine. Almost. I had heard that sob before, deployed strategically whenever my mother wanted something she was not getting. It was her opening move, the tears designed to trigger guilt and compliance. Day 2. The tears had dried, replaced by something harder. "I've been thinking about everything we sacrificed for you, Caitlin. The years we spent raising you, the opportunities we gave you. Your father worked double shifts so you could have clothes for school. I gave up my own dreams to be home with you girls, and this is how you repay us, by cutting us off without even an explanation." The martyrdom was impressive in its scope. She had rewritten history so completely that she probably believed her own version. The truth that my father had never worked a double shift in his life, that my mother's presence at home had been a source of criticism rather than comfort, did not matter. She had crafted a narrative in which she was the victim, and she was committed to it. Day 3. Now Molly had been recruited to the cause. My mother's message was brief and cutting. "I talked to your sister. She says you've always been too sensitive, always looking for reasons to feel sorry for yourself. Maybe she's right. Maybe you need to grow up and stop blaming everyone else for your problems." The blame had shifted. I was no longer a victim of their cruelty. I was the perpetrator of my own unhappiness. Classic deflection perfected over decades of practice. Day 4. The accusations began. "You're trying to destroy this family, aren't you? That's what this is really about. You've always been jealous of Molly, jealous of how close she is with us, and now you're punishing everyone because you can't stand to see us happy." My mother's voice had turned sharp, almost vicious. The mask was slipping. Beneath the tears and the martyrdom was something uglier: anger that her ATM had developed, opinions fury that her control was being challenged. Day 5. The threats arrived dressed in the clothing of concern. "People in town are starting to ask questions, Caitlin. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that she hadn't seen you at Christmas and I didn't know what to tell her. Do you really want everyone knowing our private business? Do you really want your reputation damaged because you couldn't handle a little family disagreement?" There it was, the nuclear option, public shame. The threat that if I did not comply, my mother would make sure everyone knew what a terrible daughter I was. I documented each message carefully, noting the date, the tactic, the specific phrases used. What struck me most forcibly was what was absent from every single voicemail. Not once did anyone mention Luke. Not once did anyone acknowledge what had happened in that kitchen on Christmas Eve. Not once did anyone suggest that perhaps, just perhaps, making a 10-year-old boy wash dishes and eat cold leftovers while his cousins feasted might have been wrong. In their version of events, there was no wrongdoing to address. There was only my inexplicable decision to cut them off, which had appeared out of nowhere, unprovoked and unjustified. Molly's messages deserved their own category. She had positioned herself as the peacemaker, the reasonable sister trying to bridge an unnecessary divide. I'm just trying to help everyone calm down, she said in one voicemail, her voice dripping with false sincerity. I don't know why you're so upset, but running away isn't going to solve anything. In the next message, recorded just hours later, the peacemaker mask had slipped. You've always had to make everything about you, Caitlin. Even now, even when Mom and Dad are hurting, you can't just let things go. You have to be the center of attention. Her longest voicemail was a masterpiece of victimhood. My children are traumatized, Caitlin. Do you understand that they keep asking me why Aunt Caitlin left on Christmas, what they did wrong? Madison cried for 2 days. She thinks you hate her. The manipulation was stunning in its boldness. Her children were traumatized. Not Luke, who had stood at the sink with raw hands. Not my son, who had been told his presence at the family table had to be earned. Her children, who had enjoyed a catered Christmas dinner while their cousin was exiled to the kitchen. They were the victims in Molly's telling. Always and forever they were the victims. The final message arrived on December 31st. Molly's voice was cold, all pretense of peacemaking abandoned. You know what, Caitlin, you owe us. After everything this family has done for you, after all the support we've given, you owe us. We're family. That means something whether you want to admit it or not. You don't just get to walk away because your feelings got hurt. Family doesn't work that way. I played that message 3 times, letting the words sink in deeper with each repetition. You owe us. We're family. The 2 statements connected by a logic that was entirely foreign to me, yet perfectly consistent with how my family had operated my entire life. Family in their vocabulary was not a bond of love and mutual support. It was a claim of ownership, a debt that could never be repaid, a leash that kept me tied to people who would never see me as anything more than what I could provide. That word family echoed in my mind as I began to truly understand. They were not my family. They were a pattern I had been too afraid to break. Until now. The new year arrived quietly without celebration. Luke and I watched the ball drop on television, ate popcorn, and were both asleep before 12:30. It felt right somehow, a subdued beginning to what I knew would be a year of significant change. The silence from my phone had become almost comfortable. I had stopped checking it compulsively, stopped bracing myself for the next manipulation. My family had apparently exhausted their immediate arsenal and were regrouping, which gave me time to do the same. On the 3rd day of January, I drove to Eleanor's house. I had been thinking about her constantly since Christmas, turning her warning over in my mind, like a puzzle piece I could not quite fit into place. She had known something that day at the gas station. She had tried to tell me in her gentle way, and I had not been ready to hear it. Now I was. Eleanor welcomed me into her small living room, which smelled of lavender and old books exactly as I remembered from my childhood visits. She made tea without asking if I wanted any chamomile, served in delicate china cups that had belonged to her mother, and settled into the armchair across from me with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. "I've been expecting you," she said simply. "Did you know it would happen like this Christmas, I mean? Did you know they would treat Luke the way they treated me?" Eleanor took a slow sip of her tea before answering. "I knew the pattern, Caitlin. I've watched it play out for 40 years. Your mother learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers. There's always a golden child and a scapegoat. Always someone who can do no wrong and someone who can do no right. When you left at 18, I hoped the pattern might break. But patterns like that don't break on their own. They just find new targets." The confirmation of what I had sensed my entire life should have been devastating. Instead, it felt like relief. I was not crazy. I was not too sensitive. I had not imagined the cruelty that had defined my childhood. "Did you see this coming?" I asked, needing to hear her say it plainly. "When I was a child, I mean. Did you see what they were?" Eleanor set down her teacup with careful precision. Her eyes, pale blue and still sharp, despite her 72 years, met mine with unflinching honesty. "I saw a little girl who was told she was never enough," she said quietly. "No matter how hard she tried, no matter how well she behaved, she was always the disappointment. I saw her sister being groomed into something equally tragic. Dependency, the inability to function without approval, a prison made of gold bars. And I saw parents who needed someone to blame for their own failures and someone to control so they could feel powerful. She paused, and her voice softened further. Your grandmother saw it too. We talked about it often before she passed. She worried about both of you girls in different ways. The mention of my grandmother sent a sharp ache through my chest. She had died when I was 16, the only person in my family who had ever made me feel truly seen. I still remembered her funeral standing at the edge of the crowd, while Molly sobbed dramatically in my mother's arms, receiving all the comfort that should have been shared. Grandma knew. She knew everything, Caitlin, and it broke her heart that she couldn't do more to protect you. Eleanor hesitated, something flickering behind her eyes. She wanted to help you more than you know. She made me promise. The sentence trailed off. Eleanor looked away toward the window as if suddenly interested in the bare branches of the oak tree outside. Made you promise what? I pressed. She shook her head slowly. That's a conversation for another time. You're not ready yet. There are things you need to discover on your own, first things that will help you understand what your grandmother was trying to do. She reached across the space between us and took my hand, her skin papery and warm. What I can tell you is this: not every family is blood. Some families you're born into. Some families you build, and the ones you build are often stronger because they're chosen. I thought about Luke, about the family of two we had become, about my assistant who had worked beside me for 8 years and knew my coffee order, my moods, my fears, about the small circle of friends who had nothing to do with my parents or my hometown. I had built a family, I realized. I just had not recognized it as such because it did not look like what I had been told family was supposed to be. Your grandmother believed that too, Eleanor continued. She used to say that the best families are the ones where people choose each other every day, not because they have to, but because they want to. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the tea cooling in our cups. My mind was working, turning over everything Eleanor had said and everything she had not said. There was a secret here, something about my grandmother that Eleanor was not yet ready to reveal. But more immediately, there was a decision crystallizing in my thoughts. When I left at 18, I had simply run away. I had escaped and never looked back, hoping that distance would be enough to heal the wounds my family had inflicted. But distance had not been enough. The pattern had continued without me, and now it had found Luke. Running away again would accomplish nothing. My family would continue as they always had, hurting anyone who wandered too close, controlling any narrative that threatened their comfortable self-image. This time, I needed to do more than escape. I needed to dismantle the system that enabled their behavior, the financial dependency that I had unwittingly created by trying to buy love, the social standing they used as weapons in our small community, the narrative they controlled, painting themselves as the loving family and me as the ungrateful daughter. Every tool they had used to cause harm, I needed to take away. This was not about hatred. This was about protection. For myself, for Luke, for anyone else who might become their next target. I would not destroy them out of spite. I would simply remove their ability to destroy others. I began that very night after Luke was in bed. I pulled out notebooks and spreadsheets and started documenting everything. Every financial contribution I had made over the years. Every manipulation tactic I had identified in their messages. Every pattern I could trace from my childhood to the present. This was no longer emotion driving me. This was strategy. The next morning I called my attorney. I need you to investigate my family's finances, I said. Go back 20 years, I want to know everything. What he found would change my understanding of my entire childhood. Richard called me 3 weeks later with the first results of his investigation. His voice on the phone was measured, professional, but I could hear something beneath it, surprise perhaps, or the careful neutrality of a man who has uncovered information he knows will cause pain. I think you should come to my office, he said. This is the kind of thing that's better discussed in person. I dropped Luke at school the next morning and drove to Richard's downtown office, a sleek glass building that overlooked the river. He had been my attorney for nearly a decade, handling everything from business contracts to real estate transactions, and I trusted him implicitly. When I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, he slid a thick manila folder toward me. "Let's start with your sister's business," he said. "Magnolia Lane." What he had uncovered was both shocking and, in retrospect, utterly predictable. The boutique that Molly had bragged about at every family gathering, the successful enterprise that she held up as proof of her own capability, was a house of cards waiting to collapse. According to the financial records Richard had obtained through various legal channels, Magnolia Lane had operated at a loss in nearly every quarter since its opening. The books showed a pattern of chronic mismanagement inventory ordered without regard to demand expenses that far exceeded revenue, a pricing strategy that seemed designed more for ego than profit. But the numbers only told part of the story. Molly had maxed out 3 business credit cards carrying a combined balance of over $40,000 at interest rates that made me wince. She owed back taxes to the IRS, 2 years of unfiled returns penalties accumulating monthly. Her suppliers had been paid late for over a year now, some of them more than 90 days overdue. The only reason they continued to work with her at all was the hope that she would eventually catch up. That hope, Richard noted dryly, was probably misplaced. "How is the business still open?" I asked, genuinely confused. The math did not work. A shop bleeding money this badly should have closed years ago. Richard turned to another page in the folder. 2 factors. First, her husband Derek has been covering the losses using their home equity line of credit. They've borrowed against their house to the maximum allowable amount. 1 more bad quarter and they're looking at foreclosure. I thought about Derek, the mild-mannered accountant who had always seemed vaguely embarrassed at family gatherings fading into the background while Molly commanded attention. I had always assumed he was simply quiet by nature. Now I wondered if his silence was something closer to desperation, the exhaustion of a man watching his financial future disappear into his wife's vanity project. "What's the second factor?" Richard looked at me steadily. "You." He showed me the customer records obtained through a contact who worked with one of Molly's vendors. A significant portion of Magnolia Lane's revenue, nearly 70%, came from clients who specifically mentioned my name when they made their first purchase. They had come to Molly's shop because I had recommended it. They continued shopping there because they trusted my taste. Without realizing it, I had been the invisible foundation holding up my sister's entire operation. The irony was almost too much to bear. All those years of Molly bragging about her business success, dismissing my accomplishments as luck or timing or being in the right place at the right moment. All those family dinners where she held court about the challenges of entrepreneurship as if she were the only one in the family who understood hard work. And the whole time her success had been built on a foundation I provided without even knowing it. Richard had more to show me. He pulled up Molly's Instagram profile on his tablet and scrolled through the recent posts. Champagne lunches with friends, designer handbags artfully arranged beside cups of expensive coffee. Vacation photos from a beach resort I recognized as one of the most exclusive in the Caribbean. The boutique owner life curated and filtered and presented to the world as evidence of success and sophistication. The contrast between this public image and the private reality in the folder before me was staggering. Molly was drowning in debt, her business failing her home, mortgaged to the breaking point, and yet she continued to perform prosperity for an audience that had no idea they were watching fiction. It was almost tragic. Almost. Then I remembered every dismissive comment she had ever made about my career, every time she had taken credit for success that my referrals had created, and the sympathy faded. In the weeks since Christmas, the cracks had already begun to show. Several of my regular clients had reached out asking why I was no longer recommending Magnolia Lane. Had something happened? Was there a problem with the quality? I gave vague answers about wanting to explore other options, but I knew the word would spread. In a small town, word always spreads. Vendors who had not been paid were starting to talk as well. Richard had heard rumors from his own sources, whispers at the country club, raised eyebrows at local business association meetings. Something was wrong at Molly's shop. The owner was in over her head. The bills were not being paid. These whispers had a way of becoming shouts, especially in a community where reputation was everything. I had not done anything yet except stop actively supporting my sister. I had not made a single phone call, sent a single email, said a single negative word about Magnolia Lane. I had simply withdrawn my invisible foundation, and already the structure was beginning to collapse under its own weight. Molly's empire, it turned out, had never really been hers at all. It had been mine, borrowed without permission, and claimed without acknowledgement. Remove my support, and there was nothing left to hold it up. But the attorney's investigation had uncovered something far more disturbing than Molly's failing business, a document from 20 years ago that would explain why I never went to college. Richard reached into the folder and withdrew a single sheet of paper. Its edges yellowed with age, the text faded but still legible. He placed it on the desk between us with the careful reverence of someone handling evidence in a murder trial. In a way, I suppose he was. "This was obtained from the archives of a university in Massachusetts," he said. "They keep scholarship correspondence for historical records. It took some digging, but we found it." I picked up the paper. It was a photocopy of a letter dated 21 years ago, addressed to Caitlin Marie Reed at my parents' home address. The letterhead belonged to one of the most prestigious universities on the East Coast, a school I had only ever seen in movies, a place so far removed from my small-town existence that I had never even dreamed of applying. Except apparently I had. The letter congratulated me on my acceptance to the university's class of incoming freshmen. It praised my outstanding academic record, my exceptional essay, my demonstrated leadership in extracurricular activities. And then it offered me something that made my hands begin to shake: a full scholarship. Complete tuition room and board, a generous book stipend, and a living allowance for personal expenses. Based on my family's financial situation and my academic merit, I had been selected for one of the university's most competitive awards. I read the letter 3 times before I could speak. "I never saw this." My voice came out strange, hollow. "I never applied to this school. I never even knew I had been accepted." Richard nodded slowly, as if he had expected this response. "There's more." He handed me a second document, also aged, also a photocopy. This one was written on stationery I recognized immediately. The pale blue paper with flowers in the corner that my mother had used for her personal correspondence my entire childhood. The letter was addressed to the university's admissions office, dated 2 weeks after the scholarship offer. The words blurred as I read them, my visions swimming with tears I refused to let fall. "We regret to inform you that Caitlin will be unable to accept this generous offer due to family circumstances. Her presence is needed at home to help care for her aging grandmother and assist with family responsibilities. Please remove her from consideration and offer this scholarship to another deserving student." The letter was signed with my name, my signature, or something close enough to fool a stranger who had never seen the real thing. But I knew my own handwriting. I knew the particular way I looped my letters, the slight slant I had developed in middle school. This signature was close, but it was not mine. My mother had forged my rejection of the one opportunity that could have changed everything. I thought about the years that followed high school. I thought about being told I was not college material, that my grades were not good enough, that we could not afford applications, let alone tuition. I thought about working retail jobs for 3 years, standing behind cash registers and folding clothes, and being treated as invisible by customers who looked right through me. I thought about scraping together enough money to finally attend community college at 21, sitting in classrooms with teenagers who had gone straight from high school while I felt ancient and behind and desperate to catch up. All that struggle, all that time lost, all those nights wondering why I was not smart enough, not good enough, not worthy of the same opportunities other people seemed to have handed to them. And the whole time this letter had existed, this door had been open, and my mother had slammed it shut and told me it had never been there at all. "How?" I managed to ask. "How did she even know I applied?" Richard had clearly anticipated this question. High school guidance counselors often help students apply for scholarships, especially students from lower-income families. It's possible your counselor submitted your application without your knowledge based on your academic record. The acceptance letter would have been mailed to your home address, then where my mother would have intercepted it. Where my mother would have read it, understood what it meant, and made a calculated decision to destroy it. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Why would she do this? Richard slid one more document across the desk. This one was a letter my mother had written to her sister, my aunt, who had moved to California years ago and rarely visited. The attorney had obtained it through a contact, a family friend who had kept old correspondence. The relevant passage was highlighted in yellow. I had to handle that scholarship business carefully. You know how Caitlin is always trying to prove something, always competing. If she had gone off to that fancy school, it would have destroyed Molly's confidence. Molly is so sensitive, and she looks up to her little sister whether she admits it or not. I couldn't let Caitlin outshine her. It wouldn't be fair to Molly. I read the passage again, and again, and again. Each time the words cut deeper. My mother had stolen my future to protect Molly's ego. She had looked at a full scholarship to a prestigious university, an opportunity that could have launched me into a completely different life, and decided that Molly's feelings were more important than Caitlin's future. She had not merely neglected me. She had actively sabotaged me. Systematically, deliberately, with full knowledge of what she was doing. Everything I had achieved in my life, every success, every accomplishment, every dollar I had earned, I had achieved despite my family, not because of them. I had climbed out of a hole they had dug for me, built a ladder out of nothing while they stood at the top throwing down rocks, and then they had the audacity to act as if my success was somehow theirs to claim, as if they had contributed something other than obstacles. Richard was speaking, saying something about statutes of limitations and the impossibility of legal recourse after so many years. I heard him as if from a great distance. The legal options did not matter to me in that moment. What mattered was the truth finally laid bare after 2 decades of confusion and self-doubt. I was not the failure they had always told me I was. I was the success they had tried to prevent. I thought the scholarship was the worst secret my family was hiding. I was wrong. What the attorney found next made the scholarship look like a minor oversight. Richard waited until I had composed myself before continuing. The scholarship revelation had shaken me deeply, but he had warned me there was more. I thought I was prepared. I thought nothing could shock me after learning that my mother had forged my signature to destroy my future. I was wrong. During the investigation, we traced a financial anomaly from 18 years ago. He began, his voice careful and measured. It relates to your grandmother's estate. My grandmother. The only person in my family who had ever loved me without conditions. She had died when I was 16, and I still remembered the hollow ache of that loss. The feeling that the last safe harbor in my childhood had been swept away. At her funeral, I had stood at the edge of the crowd, invisible as always, while my mother and Molly accepted condolences and played the role of grieving family. What kind of anomaly? I asked. Richard opened another section of the folder. Your grandmother maintained a payable-on-death savings account with a local bank. Are you familiar with how those work? I nodded. POD accounts were simple instruments. The money in the account transferred directly to a named beneficiary upon the account holder's death, bypassing probate entirely. They were commonly used by elderly people who wanted to ensure specific assets went to specific people without the complications of a formal will. The account contained $47,000 at the time of her death, Richard continued. The designated beneficiary was you, Caitlin, specifically you. The account documentation included a notation that the funds were intended for your education and future. $47,000. I heard the number, but my brain could not process it. When my grandmother died, I had been told she left nothing. My mother had explained with what I now recognized as calculated sympathy that Grandma had spent everything on medical bills in her final years. There was nothing left to inherit. I had believed this without question, because why would my mother lie about something so important? I was told she had no money, I said slowly. They said there was nothing left. That was not accurate. Richard's voice was gentle but firm. The account existed. The money was there, and it disappeared within 3 weeks of your grandmother's death. He showed me the bank records, the pod account clearly labeled with my grandmother's name and my own as beneficiary. The balance $47,216, and then a withdrawal dated 22 days after her death, emptying the account completely. Your parents claimed guardianship authority over your inheritance, Richard explained. You were 16, a minor, so they had legal standing to access the funds on your behalf. They signed documents with the bank stating that the money would be held in trust for you until you reached adulthood. In trust, I repeated. That's what the paperwork says. But there's no evidence that any trust was ever established. The money simply disappeared into their accounts. I stared at the documents, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My grandmother had set aside $47,000 specifically for me. She had known somehow that I would need help. She had tried to provide for my future even after she was gone, and my parents had stolen it. Where did the money go? Richard turned to another page. We've traced most of it. Approximately $20,000 was used as a down payment on your parents' current home, which they purchased 14 months after your grandmother's death. Another $15,000 went to startup costs for a business venture. Magnolia Lane, I said. It was not a question. Yes, your sister's boutique was partially funded by your inheritance. The remaining $12,000 appears to have been absorbed into your parents' general expenses over the following year. The cruelty was almost incomprehensible. My grandmother's gift to me, the money she had saved specifically to help me build a future, had been used to buy the house where I was treated as less than, and to fund the business my sister used to prove she was better than me. Every brick of that house, every piece of inventory in that shop had been purchased with money that was supposed to be mine. Richard had one more document to show me. This one was different from the others, not a bank statement or legal form, but a photograph of a handwritten note. The paper was old, the handwriting familiar, in a way that made my heart clench. This was found among your grandmother's personal effects, Richard said, tucked into her Bible. It was addressed to Eleanor Patterson. I took the photograph with trembling hands and read my grandmother's words. Please watch over my Caitlin. Her mother is not capable of loving her properly. I have done what I can, but I fear it will not be enough. If something happens to me, make sure Caitlin knows she was always loved. At least by me. The tears came, then the ones I had been holding back since the beginning of this meeting. They fell onto the photograph, blurring my grandmother's words, and I did not try to stop them. She had seen everything. 22 years ago, when I was just a child, my grandmother had recognized what my mother was. She had understood that I was not loved the way a daughter should be loved. She had tried to protect me, to provide for me, to ensure that I would have resources to build a life beyond the cruelty of my childhood home. And her own daughter had stolen it all. I thought about the years after my grandmother's death, the isolation, the constant criticism, the growing certainty that I was worthless, unlovable, destined to fail. I thought about working those retail jobs, scraping together pennies, believing I had no other options because my family had told me so. All that time there should have been $47,000 waiting for me. Enough for college. Enough for a fresh start. Enough to escape years earlier than I eventually did. Eleanor had kept my grandmother's secret all these years. She had watched over me as promised from a distance, waiting for the right moment. And now I understood why she had said I was not ready for certain conversations. There was so much more to this story than I had ever imagined. I had the evidence of their crimes. I had every right to be furious. But what happened next turned fury into something colder and far more powerful purpose. The weeks that followed were quiet for me, but not for my family. I had stopped reaching out, stopped responding, stopped providing the invisible support that had held their world together for so long. And without that support, the cracks I had first noticed began to widen into chasms. I did not have to seek out information about what was happening. In a small town, gossip travels faster than intention, and I had contacts everywhere. Former classmates who worked at the bank, neighbors who attended the same church as my parents, business associates who moved in the same circles as Molly. The reports came to me unbidden fragments of a picture that grew clearer with each passing day. Molly's boutique was hemorrhaging money at an accelerating rate. Without the steady stream of referrals I had unknowingly provided, customer traffic had dropped by more than half. The vendors who had been patient for months were no longer patient. 2 suppliers had already cut her off entirely, demanding payment in full before any new orders would be processed. The carefully curated Instagram presence continued champagne glasses and designer shoes and captions about living her best life. But behind the filters, the reality was increasingly desperate. My parents' property taxes went unpaid for the first time in years. The bill arrived in January, as it always did, and sat on their kitchen counter, growing more urgent while they waited for the check that had always come from me. When it did not come, they were forced to dip into their own savings that had been comfortable only because I had been covering so many of their other expenses. The streaming services stopped working. The golf club sent polite reminders that became less polite with each passing week. The small luxuries they had come to take for granted began disappearing one by one. But the real explosion came when Derek discovered the truth. Molly had apparently been hiding the full extent of their financial situation from her husband. He knew the boutique was struggling, but he did not know about the maxed credit cards, the unpaid suppliers, the months of creative bookkeeping that had masked just how dire things had become. When the home equity statement arrived showing they had borrowed to the absolute limit against their house, Derek finally understood what his wife had been hiding. The fight that followed was legendary, at least according to the neighbor who heard it through the walls. Screaming, accusations, threats of divorce. Derek demanded to know how they had gotten so deep in debt. Molly blamed the economy, blamed the suppliers, blamed everyone except herself. And when Derek pressed harder, Molly did what she had always done when cornered. She deflected blame to someone else. She blamed my parents. If you hadn't been so awful to Caitlin on Christmas, none of this would have happened. She reportedly screamed at them during a family dinner that quickly devolved into chaos. She was helping us, and you drove her away with your stupid comments about Luke. My parents predictably did not accept this criticism gracefully. If your business wasn't such a failure, you wouldn't need her money in the first place, my mother shot back. We told you that boutique was a mistake from the beginning. You funded it, Molly shrieked. You gave me the startup money. You said it was a good investment. The irony was profound, and I savored it from a distance. They were fighting about who had caused me to stop giving them money. Not about whether they had been wrong to mistreat me and Luke. Not about the cruelty that had driven me away. The harm they caused was not the issue, only the consequences of that harm. Even in crisis, they could not acknowledge their actual wrongdoing. They could only point fingers at each other, assigning blame for the loss of their financial safety net, while completely ignoring why that safety net had been withdrawn. I realized something important as I watched this unfold. I had never been the problem in this family. I had been the solution, the silent provider whose money and tolerance had masked decades of dysfunction. Without me to exploit, without my resources to paper over their failures, they were forced to confront each other. And what they found when they looked at each other was not pretty. The situation escalated when Molly learned the truth about her startup capital. I'm not entirely sure how she found out. Perhaps Derek dug into old financial records during one of their fights. Perhaps my mother let something slip in a moment of defensive anger. However it happened, Molly discovered that the money her parents had given her to start Magnolia Lane had not been theirs to give. It had come from my grandmother's estate, money that had been intended for me. Her initial reaction, I was told, was genuine shock. She had not known. For all her faults, Molly had apparently believed that the startup funds came from her parents' savings, a gesture of faith in her entrepreneurial dreams. Learning that they had actually been stolen from her younger sister was information she had not possessed, but the shock quickly turned to defensiveness. I didn't know. she told our parents according to a family friend who witnessed the confrontation. That's not my fault. You're the ones who took Caitlin's money. You're the ones who lied about it. My parents, cornered, fell back on the justification they had apparently been using for 18 years. We did what was best for the family. The money needed to be used, and Caitlin didn't need it at the time. She was living at home. She didn't have expenses. Molly had a real opportunity. The circular logic was dizzying. They had stolen my inheritance to fund Molly's business because Molly had an opportunity. But the only reason I did not have an opportunity was because they had hidden my scholarship and forged my rejection letter. They had created the conditions that made me seem like the daughter who did not need help, and then used those conditions to justify taking what was mine and giving it to Molly. By early March, the family had reached a fragile consensus on one thing only: they needed to confront me directly. The voicemails and text messages had not worked. The silent treatment had not worked. They needed to face me in person to make their case, to somehow convince me to resume my role as the family provider. 3 days later, my assistant announced that I had visitors in the lobby. My mother, my father, and my sister, together for the first time in months, were waiting to see me. They thought they were coming to negotiate. They were wrong. I told my assistant to show them in. I could have refused to see them, could have had security escort them from the building, but I wanted this confrontation. I needed to see their faces when I told them what I knew, and perhaps in some small corner of my heart that had not yet fully hardened, I needed to give them one final chance to prove me wrong about who they were. My mother entered first, already dabbing at her eyes with a crumpled tissue. Her face was arranged in an expression of wounded disbelief, the same look she had perfected over decades of playing the martyr. She wore her best church dress as if this were a formal occasion requiring her finest performance. "Caitlin," her voice trembled with practiced emotion. "How could you do this to us? We're your family. Your father hasn't slept in weeks. We've been worried sick about you." My father followed behind her, his arms crossed over his chest in a posture meant to convey authority. But he looked tired and diminished, smaller somehow than I remembered him being. The confident patriarch who had once seemed so powerful had shrunk into a nervous old man standing in his daughter's office, clearly out of his depth. Molly brought up the rear, playing the role of reluctant mediator. She lingered near the door as if she might need to make a quick escape. Her expression carefully calibrated to suggest she was merely here to help facilitate understanding between reasonable people. "We just want to understand what we did wrong," Molly said, her voice soft and conciliatory. "There's obviously been some kind of miscommunication. If we can just talk about it like adults, I'm sure we can work this out." I watched them arrange themselves in front of my desk, 3 actors hitting their marks for a scene they had clearly rehearsed. I recognized every manipulation technique they were deploying because I had spent a lifetime studying them to survive. The tears meant to trigger guilt. The crossed arms meant to intimidate. The reasonable tone meant to make me seem irrational by comparison. They had been using these tactics on me since I was a child. The only difference now was that I could see the strings. I let them settle, let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I began. "Luke washing dishes," I said, keeping my voice calm and even. My 10-year-old son standing at the sink with raw hands scrubbing pots, while Molly's children played, while adults who were supposed to love him laughed in the next room. My mother opened her mouth to respond, but I continued before she could. "Cold leftovers on a paper plate while everyone else ate the dinner I paid for. $5,000 for a meal my son was not allowed to share." Father looked away, his eyes finding sudden interest in the corner of the ceiling. Decades of favoritism. Molly at the main table, Caitlin in the kitchen. Molly praised for every small achievement, Caitlin dismissed for every success. The same pattern repeated year after year until it seemed normal, until I almost believed I deserved it. Molly shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her mediator's mask beginning to slip. "The scholarship." I watched my mother's face as I said the words. A full ride to a prestigious university, hidden, rejected, forged with my signature so I would never know what I had been offered. what I had earned. Nothing. Her expression did not change. Not a flicker of guilt, not a shadow of shame. And grandmother's money. $47,000 she set aside specifically for my future. Stolen within weeks of her death. Used to buy your house. Used to fund Molly's business. My inheritance taken from me before I even knew it existed. I stopped. The silence in my office was absolute. I watched their faces searching for something, remorse, recognition, any acknowledgement that they understood the weight of what they had done. Father continued to study the ceiling. Molly wrapped her arms around herself as if physically protecting against my words. But my mother looked at me with an expression I had seen 1,000 times before. Impatience. Dismissal. The face of a woman being forced to listen to complaints she considered beneath her attention. "Are you finished?" she asked. I nodded. She waved her hand as if brushing away an irritating fly. "The dishes were just chores, Caitlin. Children help at family gatherings. That's normal. The scholarship was 20 years ago, ancient history. And your grandmother's money went to the whole family, the house you grew up in, your sister's livelihood. You benefited from those things too." She sighed heavily. "You've always been too sensitive. That's your real problem. You take everything personally and blow it out of proportion." I looked at my father. He said nothing. I looked at Molly. She looked at the floor. "I have one question," I said. "Do any of you believe you did something wrong? Not that it caused consequences, but that it was actually wrong. Morally wrong. Something you should not have done." The silence that followed was answer enough. But I waited. I needed to hear it spoken. My father cleared his throat. "I think there are different perspectives on these situations. What seems one way to you might seem different to us." Molly nodded quickly. "Families aren't perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. That doesn't mean anyone intended to hurt you." My mother straightened in her chair, drawing herself up with the dignity of a queen addressing an unruly subject. "You're still the ungrateful daughter you've always been. We gave you everything, a home, an upbringing, a family. And this is how you repay us. By attacking us, by trying to destroy us over ancient grievances that you've exaggerated in your own mind." I felt something snap inside me. Not break, snap clean and final like a thread that had been stretched too thin for too long. The last hope I had harbored, buried so deep I had not even known it was there, died in that moment. They would never apologize. They would never acknowledge what they had done. In their minds, they were the victims, and I was the ungrateful daughter causing problems. "Please leave," I said quietly. They stared at me. "Leave my office. Now." They rose slowly, gathering their things, exchanging glances with each other. My mother paused at the door, turning back with one final shot. "You'll regret this, Caitlin. Blood is blood. No matter what you do, we're still your family. You'll come crawling back eventually. They always do." I met her eyes. "Blood is what you used to bleed me dry for 38 years. We're done." They left. The door closed behind them, and I sat alone in my office, staring at the space where my family had stood, feeling nothing but cold, clear certainty. Ungrateful. The word followed me home that night. Ungrateful for stolen opportunities. Ungrateful for taken inheritance. Ungrateful. I decided to show them exactly what ungrateful looked like. The morning after the confrontation in my office, I called Richard and told him to proceed with everything. No more waiting. No more hoping they might come to their senses. They had shown me exactly who they were, and I finally believed them. Richard had been preparing for this possibility since January. When we met in his office 2 days later, he had a comprehensive legal strategy already mapped out, waiting only for my authorization to set it in motion. "The statute of limitations for criminal charges has long passed," he explained, spreading documents across his conference table. "Even if we could prove fraud beyond a reasonable doubt, which no prosecutor would take a case this old. But civil options are different. Civil claims have more flexibility, and in your case, We have a particularly strong theory to work with." He walked me through the legal framework. My parents had taken my inheritance under the explicit claim that they would hold it in trust for me until I reached adulthood. They had signed documents at the bank making this representation. The money was supposed to be mine, set aside for my future accessible when I turned 18. Instead, they had immediately converted it to their own use, the down payment on their house, the startup capital for Molly's business. This was not a gray area. This was textbook fraudulent misrepresentation. More importantly, the money had funded identifiable assets. We could trace the funds directly from my grandmother's account to my parents' real estate purchase and to Molly's boutique. Under a legal doctrine called constructive trust, money obtained through fraud remains the rightful property of the victim, regardless of how it has been transformed or where it has gone. If my inheritance had become a down payment on a house, then I had an equitable claim against that house. If it had become inventory in a shop, then I had a claim against that shop. "The original amount was $47,000, Richard said. "With interest calculated from the date of conversion, we're looking at a claim of approximately $85,000. That's what they owe you. That's what we're going to demand." I authorized him to send the demand letters that same afternoon. The letters went out to 3 addresses: my parents' home, Molly's home, and my parents' attorney of record. They were formal, detailed, and devastating. Each letter laid out the evidence we had gathered: the PIAD account documentation, the bank withdrawal records, the subsequent use of funds, the signed representations that the money would be held in trust. Each letter demanded repayment of $85,000 within 30 days. Each letter explained that failure to respond would result in civil litigation, including potential liens on real property. For a family that had operated in shadows and secrets for decades, the threat of public legal proceedings was more terrifying than the money itself. Everything they had done had been hidden, denied, buried under layers of family loyalty and small-town discretion. They had never imagined those secrets might someday be exposed in court filings that anyone could read. Their response came through their own attorney 2 weeks later. It was exactly what I expected. They denied everything. They claimed the POD account never existed, or if it did exist, it had been intended for the entire family, not just for me. They claimed any money that changed hands was a gift, freely given, not an inheritance stolen. They accused me of fabricating evidence, of manipulating documents, of pursuing a vendetta against my own family for reasons they could not begin to fathom. The letter was 3 pages of righteous indignation wrapped in legal language, and it contained not a single acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I had anticipated this denial. I had known they would never admit what they had done, never accept responsibility, never apologize. They were incapable of seeing themselves as anything other than victims of my inexplicable cruelty. Their denial was not a surprise, it was confirmation that I had made the right choice. I authorized Richard to proceed with filing the civil complaint. The complaint was comprehensive. It detailed the forged scholarship rejection, including photocopies of the original acceptance letter and the fraudulent response written on my mother's stationery. It documented the stolen POD account with bank records showing the withdrawal and the subsequent deposits into my parents' accounts. It traced the flow of money to identifiable assets and explained the legal theory of constructive trust. It named my parents as primary defendants and Molly as a secondary defendant who had knowingly benefited from stolen funds. When a civil complaint is filed, it becomes part of the public record. Anyone can access it. Anyone can read it. Anyone can see exactly what accusations are being made and what evidence supports them. In a small town, this kind of information spreads faster than fire. Within days of the filing, the whispers that had been circulating about Molly's failing business evolved into something more specific. People were not just talking about financial troubles anymore. They were talking about the lawsuit. They were talking about the scholarship. They were talking about inheritance theft and forged signatures, and a daughter who had been systematically sabotaged by her own parents. I said nothing publicly. I did not give interviews. I did not post on social media. I did not engage in any of the gossip that was suddenly swirling through every coffee shop and church pew and grocery store checkout line in town. I did not have to. The court documents spoke for themselves, and they spoke loudly. My mother, I heard through the grapevine, had stopped attending her weekly bridge club. The other women had started asking questions she could not answer. My father had resigned from the golf club committee, claiming health reasons, though everyone suspected the real reason was the sideways glances and awkward silences that had begun to follow him around the clubhouse. Molly had deleted her Instagram account entirely. The carefully curated illusion of success was impossible to maintain when the whole town knew her boutique had been funded with stolen money. Their reputation was crumbling, and I had not said a single word against them. I had simply told the truth in the most official forum available and let the truth do its work. But the legal pressure, as satisfying as it was not enough. I wanted them to lose more than money. I wanted them to lose the thing they valued most, their standing in a community that had always believed their lies, their status as the respectable family with the troubled daughter who just could not seem to appreciate everything they had done for her. And I knew exactly how to make that happen. The idea came to me on a quiet Sunday morning in late April while Luke and I were eating breakfast at our kitchen table. He was telling me about a project at school, something about community helpers and people who made a difference, and suddenly the scattered pieces of my plan clicked into place. I had been thinking about revenge, about taking from my family the way they had taken from me, about making them suffer the consequences of their cruelty. But revenge, I realized, was still letting them control the narrative. Revenge kept me connected to them, defined by them, focused on them. What I wanted was something bigger, something that would transform my pain into purpose and leave them behind entirely. I would not simply take from my family. I would redirect everything I had once given them toward helping others. And in doing so, I would build something meaningful out of the wreckage they had created. Within 2 weeks, I had established the Reed Family Foundation. The name was deliberate. I wanted to reclaim the Reed name to make it stand for something other than the cruelty and dysfunction that had defined my childhood. The foundation's mission was specific and personal, supporting women who had experienced financial abuse by family members. This was a form of abuse that rarely made headlines, that often went unrecognized even by its victims, that operated in shadows and silence, just as my own family had operated for decades. The foundation would offer emergency funds for women who needed to escape financially abusive situations. It would provide legal assistance for those pursuing claims against family members who had stolen from them. It would fund job training and career development for women rebuilding their lives after financial devastation. Everything my family had denied me, I would make available to others. My initial commitment was $200,000. This included the $180,000 I had removed from the family trust money that had been sitting in an account, waiting to enable my family's continued dysfunction. Instead of funding their comfortable contempt, it would now fund liberation and opportunity for strangers who had suffered similar betrayals. The foundation's mission statement was simple: because family should build you up, not break you down. Luke was the one who suggested the educational component. We were discussing the foundation over dinner one evening, and I was explaining how the programs would work when he set down his fork and looked at me with that serious expression he sometimes got when he was thinking hard about something. "What about school?" he asked. "You said Grandma hid your college letter. What if other people had that happen to them too?" I had not told Luke the full details of what I had discovered about my family, but he knew the broad strokes. He knew his grandmother had done something to prevent me from going to college. He knew I had worked for years before I could afford to continue my education. And with the simple clarity that children sometimes possess, he had identified a gap in my plans. "You're right," I said slowly. "There should be scholarships for people who got their opportunities stolen," he continued, warming to the idea. "So nobody gets their college letter hidden like you did, Mom. So they can start over." The Fresh Start Scholarship Program was born from that conversation. It would provide tuition assistance and living stipends for women returning to education after having their opportunities stolen by family obligations or sabotage. Applications would be reviewed by an independent committee to ensure fairness. The first scholarships would be awarded in the fall. This was not revenge. This was transformation. Every dollar that might have enabled my family's dysfunction would now create opportunities for people who faced similar obstacles. The money my parents had stolen from my grandmother's account, the money they had used to fund Molly's boutique and buy their comfortable home, would now, through the legal claims I was pursuing, come back to me. And when it did, it would go directly into the foundation. The cycle of harm would become a cycle of healing. When the local newspaper learned about the foundation, they wanted an interview. I agreed, understanding that this was an opportunity to shape the narrative on my own terms. The reporter was a young woman named Jennifer, who worked the lifestyle section, and she was clearly fascinated by the story of a successful businesswoman funding resources for survivors of family financial abuse. I shared carefully chosen parts of my experience. I spoke about growing up in a household where I was constantly compared unfavorably to my sister. I mentioned opportunities that had been hidden from me, resources that had been diverted away from my future. I described the long road I had traveled to build a successful business despite starting with nothing. I talked about my son and how watching someone I loved be mistreated had finally given me the courage to speak up and act. I did not name my family directly. I did not need to. In a small town, everyone knows everyone's business. The court filings were public record. The gossip had been circulating for months. When the newspaper ran the story under the headline, "Local Entrepreneur Creates Foundation for Abuse Survivors," accompanied by a photograph of me standing in my office looking confident and determined, every single reader understood exactly what family I was talking about. The article appeared on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, I had received more than 50 messages of support from people in town. Some I knew well, others I had never met. Several women reached out to share their own stories of family financial abuse. Stories they had never told anyone, stories that made them feel less alone now that someone was finally talking about this issue publicly. 3 business owners contacted me about sponsoring foundation events. The mayor's office called to discuss potential partnership opportunities with city programs. The narrative had shifted completely. For my entire life, my family had controlled the story. I was the difficult daughter, the ungrateful child, the one who could never appreciate everything they had done for her. Now the story was different. Now I was the survivor who had overcome the successful woman who was using her resources to help others, the local hero turning personal pain into public good. My family saw the article. I know they did because the newspaper that ran it sat on every coffee table in town, in every doctor's waiting room, at every hair salon. They could not escape my face on the front page of the lifestyle section praised for my generosity and resilience. They could not avoid the conversations that followed the knowing looks, the shift in how their neighbors regarded them. The headlines made me a local hero, but they made my sister's world collapse. Because everyone who read those articles did the math, and Molly's shop was next door to the woman everyone was now praising. The contrast became impossible to ignore for anyone who walked down Main Street that spring. On one side, the Reed Family Foundation was being celebrated in newspapers and community bulletins, praised as an example of turning personal hardship into public good. On the other side, Magnolia Lane sat with its once cheerful window displays looking increasingly desperate, the champagne-colored awning fading in the sun, the foot traffic that had once kept the boutique alive dwindling to almost nothing. I heard about the changes through the network of contacts I had cultivated over the years. Customers who had once praised Molly's taste and selection were now asking uncomfortable questions. Is it true about the scholarship? Did your parents really steal Caitlin's inheritance? The court documents were public and people had read them. They had drawn their own conclusions. Shopping at Magnolia Lane suddenly felt like taking sides, and most people did not want to be on the side that had forged rejection letters and stolen from a dead woman's granddaughter. Sales dropped 40% in 6 weeks. The vendors who had been patient for months finally lost patience entirely. No more net 30 terms. No more flexible payment plans. Cash on delivery only if they were willing to work with Molly at all. Several suppliers simply stopped returning her calls. The credit card companies that had extended her increasingly desperate lines of credit began their collection calls first polite, and then insistent, and then threatening. And then Derek left. He moved to a hotel downtown, the same hotel, ironically, where Luke and I had stayed on Christmas Eve, claiming he needed time to think. Everyone in town knew what that meant. The marriage that had looked so perfect in Molly's carefully filtered photographs was crumbling along with everything else. Derek had apparently had enough of discovering new financial catastrophes, new debts his wife had hidden, new lies she had told, to maintain the illusion of success. He had married the golden daughter, the successful entrepreneur, the woman who had everything together. He had not signed up for this. I watched all of this unfold from a distance, and I found that I felt less triumphant than I had expected. During the attorney's investigation, I had learned things about Molly's life that complicated my feelings in ways I had not anticipated. The woman I had resented for decades, the favored sister who seemed to have everything handed to her, had lived a life far more constrained than I realized. Molly had never left our hometown. Not for college, not for adventure, not for any of the opportunities that might have taken her beyond the reach of our parents' influence. I had assumed this was choice that she stayed because she liked being the local star, the big fish in a small pond. But the more I learned, the more I understood it as something else entirely. Molly had been kept close, encouraged to stay, praised for her loyalty, and criticized whenever she showed signs of independence. She had never built friendships outside of our parents' social circle. Her bridge club partners were our mother's friends. Her tennis doubles were women our mother had introduced her to. Even her husband had been vetted and approved by our parents before Molly was allowed to accept his proposal. Every significant decision in her adult life had passed through our mother's filter first. The successful sister role had been assigned to Molly the same way the disappointing daughter role had been assigned to me. I had been controlled through criticism made to feel worthless, so I would work endlessly to prove my worth. Molly had been controlled through praise made to feel special, so she would never want to leave the source of that specialness. Different techniques, but the same result. Daughters who existed to serve their parents' needs, rather than their own. Molly was not free. She had never been free. She had been imprisoned in a golden cage, told it was a palace, and convinced that anyone who saw bars instead of walls was simply jealous of her good fortune. I had escaped my cage at 18, clawing my way out through sheer desperation. Molly had never even realized she was trapped. This understanding did not erase the harm she had caused. It did not excuse the cruelty she had participated in, the favoritism she had enjoyed at my expense, the way she had treated Luke on Christmas Eve. But it added a layer of complexity to my feelings that I had not expected. Molly was both perpetrator and victim, both complicit in the family's dysfunction and damaged by it. The email arrived at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in late May. I was asleep when it came through, but I saw it when I woke, a notification from Molly's personal account. Not through attorneys, not through intermediaries, directly from sister to sister for the first time in months. The message was long and rambling, clearly written through tears in the middle of a sleepless night. The sentences wandered and circled back on themselves, the punctuation erratic, the tone veering between desperation and defensiveness. She begged me to stop the lawsuit. She said the shop was drowning, that she could not hold on much longer. She admitted that Derek had left, that she did not know if he was coming back. She described lying awake at night, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly, how the life she had built had crumbled into rubble. But even now, even facing the destruction of everything she had known, the email contained no real apology, no acknowledgement that she had benefited from my stolen inheritance, no recognition that she had participated in my exclusion and mistreatment for decades. No admission that what had happened to Luke was wrong. Instead, the email ended with a sentence that told me everything I needed to know about whether my sister had truly changed. "We need you, Caitlin. This is destroying everything. Please." Need. Not love. Not sorry. Not even an acknowledgement that I might have legitimate grievances. Just need. The same word my family had always used when they wanted something from me. The same transactional approach that had defined our entire relationship. Some patterns, it seemed, were too deep to break even when facing destruction. I did not reply to Molly's email. But 2 weeks later, the IRS replied to something far more damaging, and suddenly Molly's problems became much bigger than losing customers. The letter arrived at Magnolia Lane on a Thursday afternoon in mid-June. It bore the return address of the Internal Revenue Service, and its contents would accelerate the collapse that had already been building for months. I learned about it through Richard, who had contacts at the accounting firm Molly had scrambled to hire when her financial situation began unraveling. The IRS was conducting a formal audit of Magnolia Lane based on years of irregularities that had finally attracted federal attention. Unreported income from cash transactions that Molly had apparently pocketed without declaring. Questionable deductions for personal expenses disguised as business costs. And most damaging of all, money traced from my parents that had never been properly documented as either a gift or a loan. The startup capital that had launched Magnolia Lane, the money stolen from my grandmother's account, had created a paper trail that Molly had never properly addressed. When the funds appeared in her business accounts, she had simply absorbed them without explanation. No gift tax forms, no loan documents, no legitimate accounting for tens of thousands of dollars that had materialized from nowhere. For years, this sloppy bookkeeping had gone unnoticed. Now, under the scrutiny of a federal audit, every irregularity was being examined with merciless precision. This was not my doing. I had not contacted the IRS. I had not filed any complaints or provided any tips. The audit was simply the natural consequence of building a business on stolen money and lies, of sustaining an illusion through creative bookkeeping that could not withstand serious examination. But the timing coming amid the civil lawsuit, the public scrutiny, the collapse of Molly's carefully constructed image felt like the universe finally balancing accounts that had been in arrears for far too long. 3 days after the audit notice arrived, Molly appeared at my house. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard the pounding on the front door. Not a knock, pounding, desperate and urgent, the sound of someone who had abandoned all pretense of dignity. I walked to the living room and looked through the window beside the door, and what I saw stopped me in my tracks. The woman on my porch bore almost no resemblance to the polished sister who had dominated Christmas dinner 6 months earlier. Her hair was unwashed, hanging in limp strands around a face that looked like it had not seen makeup in days. Her clothes designer labels that I recognized from her Instagram posts were wrinkled and stained as if she had been wearing them for too long. Her eyes were red and swollen, her cheeks wet with tears that showed no sign of stopping. She saw me through the window, and her pounding intensified. "Caitlin, please. Please let me in. I need to talk to you. Please." I stood frozen watching her through the glass. Part of me wanted to open the door. Not because I had forgiven her, not because I was ready for reconciliation, but because the suffering person on my porch was still, despite everything, my sister. The instinct to help, to comfort, to fix it had been trained into me from childhood. I had spent decades responding to my family's needs, putting their comfort above my own well-being. That programming did not simply disappear, but I knew what opening that door would mean. It would mean returning to the old pattern. It would mean becoming the solution to their problems again, the provider who smoothed over consequences, the scapegoat who absorbed blame so the family could continue functioning. One moment of weakness, one open door, and I would be right back where I started. I did not open the door. Molly must have seen the decision in my face because her pounding grew more frantic. Words poured out of her, tumbling over each other in desperation. "They're going to take everything, Caitlin. The shop, the inventory, maybe even the house. The IRS is saying I owe penalties and back taxes I can't pay. Derek is filing for divorce. He's taking the kids half the time and he wants to sell the house to split the equity. Mom and Dad won't even talk to me anymore because they're blaming me for all of this, for making you angry, for ruining everything." She pressed her palm against the window as if she could reach through the glass to touch me. "I have nothing left. Nothing. Please, Caitlin. I'm begging you. Help me." I watched her cry. I watched the mascara she must have applied in some futile attempt to look presentable run down her cheeks in dark streaks. I watched my sister, the golden child, the favored daughter, the one who had everything, while I had nothing, fall apart on my front porch. And still I did not open the door. She must have realized I was not going to let her in because her tone shifted. The desperation remained, but something else crept into her voice, something that sounded almost like honesty. "You got out, Caitlin." Her voice was quieter now, rough from crying. "You escaped. When you were 18, you just left. You built a whole life away from them, away from all of it. I never could. Don't you see?" She pressed her forehead against the glass, her eyes meeting mine through the window. "They made sure I never could. I was the one who stayed, the one who did everything right, the one who never left their sight. And look where it got me." She laughed, then a broken sound that held no humor at all. "You were the lucky one. You just didn't know it." She stayed on my porch for another 20 minutes before finally giving up and driving away. I watched her car disappear around the corner, and then I stood in my living room for a long time thinking about what she had said. That night, after Luke was in bed, I called Eleanor. "Is it possible to hate someone and feel sorry for them at the same time?" I asked. Eleanor's response came without hesitation, as if she had been expecting this question. "That's what it means to see someone clearly dear. When you truly see a person, all of them, not just the parts that hurt you, you see both what they've done and what was done to them. Hate without pity is cruelty. Pity without boundaries is self-destruction. You need both. The hate protects you. The pity keeps you human." I did not let Molly in that day. But her words about never escaping haunted me. And 3 weeks later, she would tell me the truth about our mother, a truth that changed everything I thought I knew about our family. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, tucked into my mailbox between utility bills and advertising circulars. I recognized Molly's handwriting immediately, the careful loops and precise spacing that our mother had drilled into both of us during childhood penmanship lessons. But unlike the emails and text messages and voicemails that had bombarded me for months, this letter was different. It felt different. The envelope was plain white, addressed simply to my name, with no return address. As if Molly was not entirely sure she wanted me to know where she was living now that everything had fallen apart. I almost threw it away, unread. I had become skilled at discarding communications from my family without engaging, protecting my peace by refusing to absorb their words. But something made me hesitate. Perhaps it was the handwriting, so deliberate and careful, suggesting effort rather than impulse. Perhaps it was simple curiosity. Whatever the reason, I sat down at my kitchen table and opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages long, written on lined paper that looked like it had been torn from a notebook. The handwriting started neat and controlled, but grew more ragged as the pages progressed, as if the writer had been losing composure while she wrote. "I need you to understand why I became who I am," the letter began. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking you to drop the lawsuit or save my business or fix my life. I just need someone to know the truth. And you're the only person left who might actually understand." I read the letter 3 times before I fully absorbed what it contained. Molly was not asking for anything. She was confessing. The letter described a childhood I had never seen, a parallel universe that existed alongside my own memories. While I remembered being criticized and excluded, Molly described being praised and imprisoned. Our mother had told her constantly that she was special, that she was the favorite, that she was the only daughter who truly understood what family meant. But this praise came with conditions that were never explicitly stated, only enforced through subtle withdrawal of affection whenever Molly stepped out of line. She was not allowed to have friends their mother had not approved. She was not allowed to pursue interests their mother found unsuitable. She was not allowed to disagree, to question, to want anything different from what their mother had decided she should want. The golden child role came with golden chains, and Molly had worn them so long she had forgotten they were there. The letter ended with a request. Would I meet her? Not at her house, not at mine, not anywhere connected to the family. Just a neutral location where 2 sisters could finally speak honestly. I agreed. I am not entirely sure why. Perhaps Eleanor's words about pity and boundaries had affected me more than I realized. Perhaps I simply needed to see Molly's face when she said these things to judge for myself whether this was another manipulation or something genuine. We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over, a place where neither of us would be recognized. Molly was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a cup she did not seem to be drinking. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had dominated family gatherings for decades. Thin, pale, her designer clothes replaced by a simple sweater that hung loose on her diminished frame. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. I nodded but said nothing. I wanted to hear her speak. I wanted to understand what she was trying to tell me. Molly took a deep breath and began. She told me about the other side of our childhood. While I was being criticized and excluded, she was being praised and controlled. Our mother had told her terrible things about me. That I was secretly the favorite. That our father loved me more than he loved Molly. That I was smarter, more talented, more likely to succeed. That I would abandon the family the moment I got the chance, and when I did, Molly would be left alone with parents who had always preferred her sister. "She made me jealous of you," Molly said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She made me hate you. Every time I was cruel to you, every time I joined in when she criticized you, I was trying to prove that I deserved the love she kept telling me you were stealing. I was competing for something that didn't even exist." I thought about all the times Molly had joined our mother in belittling me. All the times she had laughed at my failures, dismissed my successes, made me feel small and worthless. I had always assumed she did this because she was naturally cruel, because she enjoyed her position of superiority, because she simply did not care about me. Now, I was hearing a different story. She had been manipulated into cruelty, trained to see me as a threat, so she would cling more tightly to the source of her conditional approval. "I didn't know she was lying until you left," Molly continued. "I thought when you were gone things would be better. I would finally have Mom to myself without you there competing for her attention. But nothing changed. She still criticized me. She still controlled everything I did. She just found new ways to make me feel inadequate." Molly laughed bitterly. "Turns out I was never competing with you, Caitlin. I was competing with a fiction she created to keep me in line." The full picture emerged as Molly talked. Our mother had systematically sabotaged me to prevent me from showing up, Molly, because a successful Caitlin would undermine the narrative she had built. If I went to that university, if I proved I was smart and capable and worthy, Molly might start to question whether she was really the special one. The scholarship had to be hidden. My independence had to be prevented. Mother needed me to fail so Molly would believe she was succeeding, but she also needed Molly to stay dependent, so she engineered that too. The shop, the marriage, the life that had seemed so golden, none of it had been Molly's choice. "She told me the boutique was my idea," Molly said, tears streaming down her face now. "It wasn't. She suggested it. She said I had such good taste that I would be perfect running a little shop, that I should stay close to home where she could help me. She chose the location. She approved the inventory. She even came up with the name. I thought I was building something for myself. I was just building another prison." I sat in silence, absorbing what she was telling me. Our mother had created 2 daughters perfectly designed to serve her needs. A scapegoat to blame for every family problem. A golden child to reflect her glory and never leave her side. She had pitted us against each other so neither of us would recognize the real enemy. And it had worked for 40 years. Luke's words echoed in my mind, something he had said months ago when I tried to explain why I was so angry at people who shared my blood. "Sometimes hurt people, Mom. It doesn't make it okay, but maybe it makes it make sense." Molly had hurt me. That was undeniable. But she had been hurt too, shaped and twisted by the same woman who had shaped and twisted me. We were both victims, both perpetrators, both trapped in a system designed by someone who should have loved us unconditionally, but chose instead to use us as tools. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Molly said. "I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I finally see it. All of it. The things she did to you, the things she did to me, the way she kept us fighting, so we would never realize we were on the same side." I reached across the table and took my sister's hand. I did not know yet what this meant for the lawsuit, for the foundation for the future. I only knew that something had shifted, and the world looked different than it had when I walked into this coffee shop. Molly's truth changed everything, but it did not change my plan. Because the next discovery was not about the past. It was about the present. And what my father was planning would make everything else look like miscommunication. The conversation with Molly had unsettled me in ways I was still processing when Richard called 3 days later. His voice on the phone was different than usual, tighter, more urgent, stripped of the professional calm that normally characterized our interactions. "We need to meet immediately," he said. "Something has come up that you need to know about. It involves Luke." I was at his office within the hour, my heart pounding with a fear I had not felt since Christmas Eve. Luke was at summer camp for the day, safe and supervised, but the mention of his name in connection with my family had triggered every protective instinct I possessed. Richard did not waste time with pleasantries. He placed a folder on the desk between us and opened it to reveal printed screenshots. Conversations from a gaming platform I recognized as one Luke used to play with his school friends. "Your father has been contacting Luke directly," Richard said. "For the past 3 weeks, someone using the username GrandpaJim72 has been messaging your son through this platform. The conversations started casually asking about his favorite games, his summer plans, normal grandparent questions. But they've escalated." I looked at the screenshots, my blood growing colder with each message I read. The early conversations were innocuous enough, the kind of thing a loving grandfather might say to a grandson he missed. But as the weeks progressed, the questions became more specific, more probing. "What time does your mom usually get home from work? What's your school schedule like? Do you have an alarm system at your house? Does your mom have a boyfriend who stays over?" "Luke didn't realize anything was wrong," Richard continued. "He thought he'd made a new friend who happened to be older. Kids that age don't always recognize when adults are asking inappropriate questions." My hands were shaking as I set down the screenshots. "How do you know this was my father?" Richard turned to another page in the folder. "We traced the account. The email address used to register it is one your father has used for years. And there's more." He showed me a photograph of a birthday card, store-bought generic with "Happy Birthday to a Special Grandson" printed on the front. This was delivered directly to Luke's school 2 weeks ago. The office staff set it aside because it didn't come through normal channels. When they couldn't reach you about it, they contacted me as your attorney of record. I stared at the card. Luke's birthday was not for another 3 months. My father had sent a birthday card at the wrong time to the wrong place, through channels designed to circumvent me entirely. This was not a grandfather missing his grandson. This was reconnaissance. When confronted through his own attorney, your father claimed he just wanted to see Luke, Richard said. He said you were keeping them apart unfairly, that he had a right to a relationship with his grandson. But the secretive approach tells a different story. If he simply wanted to reconnect, he would have gone through proper channels. He wouldn't be asking a 10-year-old about home security systems. Richard opened another section of the folder. "There's something else. My investigator discovered that your father consulted with a family law attorney 6 weeks ago. He was asking about grandparents' rights, specifically whether there was any legal mechanism he could use to force visitation with Luke." Grandparents' rights. I knew what that meant. In some states, grandparents could petition for court-ordered visitation if they could demonstrate an existing relationship with the child and prove that visitation was in the child's best interest. It was a legal avenue designed to protect genuine family bonds, but in my father's hands, it would be a weapon. The attorney he consulted told him he had a weak case, Richard continued. Luke doesn't have an established relationship with your parents. There's no history of regular visitation to protect. Any petition would likely fail, but that's not what concerns me. He slid a final document across the desk. My investigator obtained copies of emails your father sent to his attorney after that consultation. Read the highlighted sections. The phrases jumped off the page, each one hitting me like a physical blow. The boy is our only card left. If she wants to see him have a relationship with family, she'll cooperate. We need to find a way to use this. The lawsuit is destroying us. My father had never shown genuine interest in Luke. On Christmas Eve, he had sat silently while his grandson was banished to wash dishes. He had never sent birthday presents, never called to check in, never made any effort to build a relationship with the child he was now claiming he desperately wanted to see. Luke was not a grandson to him. Luke was leverage, a bargaining chip, a hostage to be used in financial negotiations. I felt something shift inside me, something fundamental changing in my chest. The anger I had carried for months, the hot, burning fury that had driven me to file lawsuits and establish foundations and dismantle my family's comfortable delusions, transformed into something different, something colder, something far more dangerous. I had tolerated their cruelty toward me for 38 years. I had learned to survive it, to work around it, to build a life despite the obstacles they placed in my path. Their contempt for me had become background noise, painful but manageable, a wound I had learned to live with. But Luke was different. Threatening my son crossed every line that existed. Using a child as a weapon in adult disputes was beyond contempt. It was predatory. It was the act of someone who saw children not as people to be protected, but as tools to be exploited. And I would not allow it. Not for one more second. "What do we do?" I asked, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, controlled, utterly calm. Richard had clearly been preparing for this question. "First, we document everything. These screenshots, the birthday card, the emails, all of it goes into a file. Second, we notify Luke's school that no one from your family is authorized to contact him or pick him up. Third, we consult with a family law attorney about filing for a protective order if necessary. Your father's behavior could constitute stalking of a minor." I nodded, absorbing the information. "And the civil lawsuit?" "That's where this gets interesting." Richard leaned forward. "Your father's emails make it clear he sees Luke as leverage to make the lawsuit go away. That's potentially witness tampering and extortion. It significantly strengthens your position, and it opens up new avenues for legal action." I thought about my parents' house purchased with my stolen inheritance. I thought about Molly's shop funded with money meant for my education. I thought about the years of sacrifice, the decades of contempt, the systematic destruction of every opportunity I should have had. I had been pursuing justice through proper channels, content to let the legal system determine fair compensation for what had been taken from me. But this changed things. My father had come for my son. He had tried to use Luke, innocent, kind, trusting Luke, as a weapon against me. He had sent messages to a child probing for weaknesses, gathering intelligence, treating my boy like a chess piece to be captured and deployed. That was his final mistake. I looked at Richard with absolute clarity. "I want to accelerate everything. The settlement negotiations, the property claims, all of it. I want to own every asset they might ever use against me or Luke. I want them to have nothing left to leverage, nothing left to threaten, nothing left to hold over our heads." Richard nodded slowly. "That's aggressive. It will escalate the conflict significantly." They escalated it when they came for my son. I stood gathering my purse, ready to leave and begin the process of protecting Luke from people who should have loved him. They wanted to use my child against me. They wanted to make him a hostage. That was their choice. Now they'll live with the consequences. They wanted to use my son against me. That was their final mistake. Within 72 hours, I would own their house, their business, and their future. And they would learn that the daughter they dismissed was always the most dangerous one. The next 72 hours moved with the precision of a military operation. Richard coordinated with my financial advisors, my accountants, and a team of real estate specialists who understood exactly what I was trying to accomplish. Every legal document was prepared in advance. Every contingency was planned for. By the time my family understood what was happening, it would already be done. The civil lawsuit reached its conclusion in late July. My parents' attorney had spent months filing motions requesting extensions, attempting every procedural delay available under the law. But evidence does not disappear simply because you refuse to acknowledge it. The bank records existed. The PIOD account documentation existed. The trail of stolen money leading directly to identifiable assets existed. When their attorney finally advised them that continuing to fight would only increase their eventual liability, they had no choice but to negotiate. The settlement meeting took place in a conference room at Richard's office. I sat on one side of the table with my legal team. My parents sat on the other, looking diminished and defeated, their own attorney speaking for them because they could barely meet my eyes. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. They acknowledged the debt. $47,000 in stolen inheritance plus 18 years of interest, calculated at the standard legal rate plus attorney fees and court costs. The total came to just over $89,000. They did not have this money in liquid assets. Their savings had been depleted by months of legal fees and the slow collapse of their comfortable lifestyle. Their only significant asset was their home, the house purchased with my grandmother's stolen money, the house where I had been treated as less than human for 18 years. They signed over 60% ownership of the property to me in lieu of cash payment. I watched my mother's hand tremble as she signed the documents. I watched my father stare at the table, refusing to look up. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working beneath his skin. They were transferring majority control of their home to the daughter they had dismissed, exploited, and betrayed for nearly 4 decades. The house that had been purchased with money stolen from me now belonged primarily to me. The terms of the agreement allowed them to remain in the house as tenants. I was not evicting them, not forcing them onto the street, not leaving them homeless in their 70s. But they could no longer leverage the property. They could not mortgage it. They could not sell it without my approval. Their primary asset, the thing they had stolen and built their comfortable lives upon, was now controlled by the person they had stolen it from. My mother tried to speak as she handed the signed documents back across the table. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. My father simply stood and walked out of the room without looking at me. Their attorney gathered the papers and followed, leaving me alone with Richard and the weight of what had just happened. "How do you feel?" Richard asked quietly. I considered the question carefully. "I feel like something that was always wrong has finally been made right. Not good, not happy, just right." Molly's situation resolved itself with less direct confrontation, but equal finality. The IRS audit had uncovered years of irregularities that could not be explained away. The penalties and back taxes owed exceeded anything Molly could pay, especially with her business failing and her marriage ending. When her creditors filed their claims and the courts ordered liquidation of assets, bankruptcy became not just likely, but inevitable. Magnolia Lane went up for auction on a humid afternoon in mid-August. The proceedings were held at the county courthouse, a sterile environment that seemed fitting for the death of something that had never really been alive in the first place. The shop that my sister had believed was her success, her identity, her proof that she was the golden child who deserved praise, it was just merchandise and fixtures, now inventory to be sold to the highest bidder. I did not attend the auction in person. I did not need to. My LLC, a legal entity with no obvious connection to my name, had been established specifically for this purpose. My representative attended, made the appropriate bids, and when the auctioneer's gavel finally fell, Magnolia Lane belonged to me. The purchase price was a fraction of what the business had supposedly been worth at its peak. The boutique that had been started with my grandmother's money had returned to my grandmother's intended beneficiary. I felt complex emotions as I received the news. Satisfaction, certainly. Justice had been served in a tangible, measurable way. But there was sadness, too. Molly had poured years of her life into that shop, believing she was building something real. The fact that it had always been built on stolen foundations did not erase the effort she had invested, the dreams she had attached to those walls. I was not celebrating my sister's destruction. I was simply ensuring that nothing stolen from me could ever be used against me again. The news spread quickly. In a small town, word of an auction travels fast, and word of who bought the property travels faster. Within days, my family knew that the mysterious LLC belonged to me. that I now owned their home and their failed business, that the daughter they had dismissed and exploited for decades now held their entire world in her hands. My mother's reaction was volcanic. She called my phone 17 times in a single afternoon, each voicemail more hysterical than the last. Betrayal, cruelty, vindictiveness. She accused me of deliberately destroying the family, of taking pleasure in their suffering, of being the monster she had always known I was. The calls became so frequent and so unhinged that I eventually had Richard send a formal cease and desist letter. The calls stopped, replaced by a silence that felt more menacing than the screaming. My father's reaction was different, but equally predictable. He sent a single letter, typed formal, clearly drafted, with input from an attorney threatening legal action for what he called predatory acquisition and elder abuse. The threats were empty, of course. Everything I had done was perfectly legal. The settlement had been negotiated in good faith with their full legal representation. The auction had been conducted according to standard bankruptcy procedures. There was no case to bring, no law I had broken, no court that would entertain his complaints. But he needed to threaten something, needed to feel like he still had power, even when every shred of it had been stripped away. Molly's reaction surprised me. She did not call screaming. She did not send threatening letters. She simply showed up at my office one afternoon unannounced and waited in the lobby until I agreed to see her. When she sat down across from my desk, she looked tired but strangely peaceful, as if some internal battle had finally ended. "I knew it would be you," she said simply. "When I heard someone bought the shop, I knew. I think I always knew this was how it would end." I waited for the accusations, the anger, the blame. They did not come. "It was never really mine anyway, was it?" Molly continued. "The shop, I mean. It was built with money that should have been yours. Started with Mom's plans, not mine. Kept alive by clients you sent me. I just didn't see it until now." She laughed softly, a sound without humor. "I spent 20 years running a business that was never really mine, living a life that was never really mine. And now it's over. And honestly, Caitlin, I'm relieved." The power dynamic had completely reversed. The daughter they had dismissed now held their home and their failed dreams in her hands. I could have been cruel. I could have evicted my parents, demolished my sister's former shop, erased every trace of their existence from the property I now controlled. They expected this, I think. They expected me to become the monster they had always claimed I was. But I had never wanted to be their tormentor. I had only ever wanted to be free of them. They expected me to evict them, destroy them, humiliate them. They did not expect what I did next, because what I built from their ruins would change everything, including whether we could ever be family again. The morning after Molly's visit to my office, I stood in the empty shell of what had once been Magnolia Lane. The space had been cleared of inventory during the bankruptcy proceedings. The overpriced vases, the artisanal candles, the carefully curated home accessories that had represented my sister's illusory success. What remained was just walls and windows, potential waiting to be shaped into something new. I had spent weeks planning this transformation. Architects had drawn up blueprints. Contractors had submitted bids. Every detail had been considered, every choice deliberate. But standing in the empty space, watching dust motes drift through sunbeams, I felt the magnitude of what I was about to do settle into my bones. This building had been funded with my grandmother's stolen gift. It had housed my sister's manufactured dreams. Now it would become something real, something that would help women who had experienced the same kind of family betrayal that had shaped my own life. The renovation took 6 weeks. I hired local contractors, many of them women-owned businesses that the Reed Foundation was already supporting. Several of the workers were women returning to the workforce after years of absence, divorces, caregiving responsibilities, economic hardships that had interrupted their careers. Paying them fair wages to rebuild this space felt like the beginning of something circular, something that would keep generating good long after the construction was finished. The transformation was remarkable. The open floor plan that had once displayed expensive merchandise was divided into functional spaces, each designed with specific purposes in mind. Near the front, large windows filled a comfortable gathering area with natural light, soft chairs, warm colors, a place where women could simply sit and feel safe, surrounded by others who understood their struggles. Against one wall, a row of computer stations offered free internet access for job searches, online courses, and the countless digital tasks that modern life requires. A meeting room in the back would host support groups, counseling sessions, and workshops on everything from financial literacy to legal rights. The foundation had partnered with local attorneys who agreed to provide pro bono consultations for women dealing with family financial abuse, help with restraining orders, property disputes, inheritance claims, all the legal tangles that kept victims trapped in cycles of dependency. The small office space that had once been Molly's back room became the administrative heart of the operation. 2 desks, filing cabinets, a modest conference table. Nothing fancy, nothing wasteful. Every dollar that did not go into overhead could go into direct assistance for women who needed it. The sign outside was the last piece installed. I had agonized over the wording for weeks before finally settling on something simple and direct. Fresh Start Center, a place to begin again. The old Magnolia Lane signage was removed and donated to the Historical Society, which accepted it without comment. Whatever story they would tell about the boutique's rise and fall, it would not be the real one. But the real story did not matter anymore. What mattered was what came next. While the renovation progressed, I also addressed the situation with my parents' house. Richard drafted documents establishing the terms of their continued residence. They could remain in the home rent-free for the rest of their lives. I was not interested in making elderly people homeless, regardless of what they had done to me. But the property was restructured into a life estate that would eventually transfer full ownership to the Reed Foundation. When my parents passed, the house would be sold, and the proceeds would fund scholarships and emergency assistance for decades to come. There were conditions attached to their residence, non-negotiable terms that my parents had to accept in writing. They were prohibited from mortgaging, selling, or otherwise encumbering the property. They were required to maintain it in reasonable condition. And most importantly, any attempt to contact Luke outside of supervised Caitlin-approved interactions would result in immediate eviction proceedings. I thought carefully about that last condition before including it. Part of me wanted to simply forbid all contact to build a wall between my son and the people who had tried to use him as a bargaining chip. But Luke deserved the chance to know his grandparents, even flawed ones, if they could demonstrate that they were capable of treating him with genuine love rather than as a tool for manipulation. Supervised visits on my terms in my presence. That was the offer. They could take it or leave it. They took it. They had no choice. The house where I had been made to feel worthless for 18 years would now ultimately fund opportunities for others who had been told the same lies. My grandmother's stolen gift, redirected through decades of interest, transformed through legal proceedings channeled into property equity, would finally serve its intended purpose. Grandma had wanted to help me build a future. 30 years late, her wish was coming true, just not in the way anyone could have predicted. As September approached, the Fresh Start Center began to take its final shape. Local businesses donated supplies and services. A furniture store contributed chairs and tables, a technology company provided refurbished computers, a printing shop produced brochures and flyers at cost. The community was rallying around the foundation in ways that surprised and moved me. People wanted to help. They just needed to be shown how. The women already receiving foundation assistance became central to the preparation effort. They helped paint walls, arrange furniture, stock supplies, and plan the opening ceremony. Working together on something concrete and positive created bonds that no support group session could replicate. I watched strangers become friends, watched isolated women find community, watched the center become something more than a building before it even officially opened. Luke threw himself into the project with characteristic enthusiasm. When I mentioned that the Children's Corner needed something special, he immediately volunteered to paint murals. For 2 weeks, he spent every afternoon after camp working on designs: a bright sun with streaming rays, a garden of wildflowers, a rainbow arcing across a blue sky. Simple images painted with a child's sincerity that transformed a corner of the center into something magical. "This is for the kids whose moms are getting help," he explained as he worked his tongue poking out in concentration. "So they know it's going to be okay. So they have something nice to look at while they wait." I watched my son paint hope onto walls that had once housed my family's dysfunction, and I understood something that had been unclear to me throughout this entire journey. This was never about revenge. Not really. Revenge would have meant destroying them, evicting my parents, demolishing the shop, erasing every trace of my family's existence. Revenge would have left nothing but ashes and bitterness, a victory that felt like loss. What I had done instead was transformation. Taking their power was not about hurting them. It was about redirecting resources, money, property, opportunity to people who would use them with love instead of cruelty. The same inheritance that had funded decades of dysfunction would now fund decades of healing. The same building that had housed manufactured success would now house genuine support. Everything they had used to harm me had been converted into something that would help others. Eleanor visited the center almost daily during the final weeks of preparation, bringing baked goods for the workers and unsolicited advice for everyone. She walked through the transformed space with tears in her eyes, touching the walls, examining every detail, nodding her approval. "Your grandmother would have loved this," she said quietly one afternoon, standing in the middle of the gathering area. "She always believed you would do something remarkable. She just didn't know what form it would take." I wish she could have seen it. Eleanor smiled mysteriously. "Maybe she can, dear. Maybe she can." The grand opening was scheduled for the second Saturday in September. Press releases were sent to every media outlet in the region. The mayor had agreed to attend and say a few words. Local business owners, community leaders, and foundation supporters were all invited. The ribbon had been ordered purple, the foundation's official color chosen because it represented dignity and wisdom. I spent hours working on my speech, drafting and redrafting until the words felt right. I would talk about the foundation's mission, about the services the center would offer, about the community partnerships that made it all possible. I would share carefully chosen parts of my own story, enough to connect with others who had experienced similar betrayals, not so much that it became self-indulgent. And I would talk about transformation, about taking the broken pieces of a painful past and building something beautiful from them, about refusing to let the people who hurt you define your future, about the power of redirecting pain into purpose. 4 invitations went out unsigned, addressed simply to the recipients without return information. 1 to my mother, 1 to my father, 1 to Molly, 1 to Derek, who is still technically family, even as his divorce from my sister moved toward finalization. I did not know if any of them would come. I did not know if I wanted them to come. But they deserved the chance to witness what their cruelty had ultimately created, not destruction, but renewal. Everything was ready for the grand opening. The press releases were sent, the ribbon ordered, the speeches written. I sent 4 invitations that went unsigned to my mother, my father, my sister, and her husband. Because what I planned to say at that podium would either end us forever or begin something new. The morning of the grand opening dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect September day that felt like a blessing. I arrived at the Fresh Start Center 3 hours early, walking through the transformed space one final time, adjusting flowers that did not need adjusting, straightening chairs that were already straight. Nervous energy hummed through my body, but beneath it was something else, a profound sense of rightness, of pieces finally falling into place after decades of displacement. By noon, the crowd had grown beyond anything I had anticipated. Over 200 people filled the space, spilling out onto the sidewalk, gathering around the small stage we had constructed near the entrance. I saw community members I recognized from years of business dealings, local officials in their formal attire ready to be photographed supporting a good cause. Women I had never met who wore the particular expression of those who understood exactly why this center existed. Press photographers jockeyed for position, their cameras clicking and flashing as the mayor delivered his opening remarks. And in the back, standing awkwardly together for the first time in months, I spotted my family. My mother stood rigid, her arms crossed, her expression tight-lipped and defiant. She wore her best church dress and the pearl necklace my father had given her for their anniversary years ago, armor for a battle she expected to fight. My father stood beside her, but he looked diminished, smaller than I had ever seen him, as if the past months had physically reduced him. Molly hovered at the edge of the group, hollow-eyed and uncertain, her gaze moving constantly around the room as if searching for escape routes. They were not here to celebrate. They were here because not attending would have been more conspicuous, would have confirmed every rumor and suspicion circulating through the community. By showing up, they could pretend they supported this endeavor, could claim they had always been proud of their daughter, could maintain whatever shreds of public image remained to them. They expected me to play along. They expected professional remarks, impersonal gratitude, safe platitudes that would allow everyone to pretend we were a normal family. They expected wrong. When the mayor finished his introduction and I stepped to the podium, my hands were steady. The note cards I had prepared sat untouched beside me. I had memorized every word, rehearsed every pause, because this speech was too important to read. Family financial abuse affects millions of Americans every year. I began, my voice carrying clearly through the speakers. It happens when the people who are supposed to love us instead use money as a weapon, controlling, stealing, manipulating. Unlike other forms of abuse, it often leaves no visible scars. But make no mistake, the wounds are deep and they last for decades. I shared statistics, studies, research about the long-term effects of financial abuse on victims' mental health, career prospects, ability to form trusting relationships. The crowd listened attentively, nodding at familiar patterns, some wiping away tears of recognition. Then I transitioned into story. I want to tell you about a little girl, I said, and my eyes found my mother's face in the crowd. A little girl who was told she was not accomplished enough to sit at the family table. While her sister was praised, this girl was criticized. While her sister was celebrated, this girl was invisible. She learned early that love in her family was conditional, and no matter how hard she tried, she could never meet the conditions. The crowd was utterly silent now. In the back, my mother's face had gone pale. When this girl was 17, she earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university. It would have changed her life, but she never saw that letter. Her own mother hid it, forged a rejection, and told the girl she was not college material. The mother did this because she was afraid that if one daughter succeeded too visibly, the other daughter might feel inadequate. I heard a gasp from somewhere in the crowd. I did not look to see where it came from. This girl's grandmother tried to help. She set aside money specifically for this girl's future, $47,000 saved with love, left with explicit instructions. But when the grandmother died, the girl's parents stole that money. They used it to buy their own house. They used it to fund the favored sister's business. They told the girl her grandmother had left nothing. My father was staring at the floor now. Molly's hand had come up to cover her mouth. That girl grew up. She built a successful business despite every obstacle her family placed in her path. She raised a son who is kind and loving and brave. And when she brought that son home for Christmas, hoping he might finally experience the family warmth she had never received, she found him standing at the sink, washing dishes, eating cold leftovers while his cousins feasted on a meal his mother had paid for. I paused, letting the words settle over the crowd like falling leaves. That girl was me. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then I looked directly at the back of the room, directly at my family, and spoke the words I had carried in my heart for months. Some families build you up. Some families break you down. If you are here today because your family chose breaking, I want you to know that their cruelty says nothing about your worth. It says everything about their fear. My voice grew stronger, more certain. They diminish you because they are afraid you will outshine them. They steal from you because they cannot build for themselves. They keep you small because your smallness is the only thing that makes them feel large. I swept my gaze across the entire crowd now, but my words were for one woman in particular. And when you succeed anyway, When you survive every attempt to keep you down, when you build something beautiful from the ruins they left behind, that is the sweetest victory any of us can claim. Not revenge, not destruction, just the simple, powerful truth of becoming everything they said you could never be. The applause started slowly, then built to something thunderous. People rose to their feet. The women who had already benefited from the foundation were crying openly, embracing each other, recognizing their own stories in mine. The photographers captured it all. In the back of the room, my mother's face had transformed into something I could not read. My father had not moved. Molly was crying silently, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. The ribbon was cut. The photographs were taken. The crowd began to mingle, to explore the center, to share their own stories with each other in the warm, gathering space I had created for exactly this purpose. After the speech, after the ribbon cutting, after the photographs, my mother pushed through the crowd toward me. Her face held something I had never seen before, and I did not know whether it was the beginning of change or the end of everything. My mother reached me before I could escape into the crowd. She appeared at my elbow as I was accepting congratulations from a city councilwoman, her presence like a cold draft in an otherwise warm room. I excused myself from the conversation and allowed her to guide me toward a quiet hallway near the back offices, away from the press and the well-wishers and the witnesses. When we were alone, she turned to face me. Her expression was carefully composed, but I could see the effort it took to maintain that composure. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. For a moment she said nothing, simply looking at me as if seeing someone she did not quite recognize. "I never meant for things to go this far," she finally said. Her voice shook, but the words came out measured and deliberate, clearly rehearsed. "We all make mistakes, Caitlin. Parents are not perfect. We do the best we can with what we know at the time. I was trying to do what was best for the family, for everyone. You have to understand that." I listened to her speak, analyzing each phrase the way I had learned to analyze business proposals, looking for substance beneath the surface, for commitment behind the promises. What I found was hollow. She had not mentioned the scholarship. She had not acknowledged stealing my grandmother's money. She had not apologized for how Luke was treated on Christmas Eve. She had offered no admission of specific wrongdoing, no acknowledgement that anything she had done was actually wrong. She was asking for forgiveness without confession, for reconciliation without accountability. It was the manipulator's version of an apology, words that sounded like remorse, but committed to nothing. "What specifically are you sorry for, Mom?" Her eyes flickered with something annoyance, perhaps, at being pressed for details. "For all of it. For everything that happened. For how things turned out." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." Her voice hardened slightly. "I did what I thought was right at the time. Maybe I was wrong. But I was your mother, and I had to make difficult decisions. You'll understand when Luke is older." I shook my head slowly. "No, Mom, I won't understand. Because I would never hide my son's opportunities to protect someone else's ego. I would never steal from him to fund my own comfort. I would never make him feel worthless so someone else could feel special." I met her eyes directly. "Those were not difficult decisions. Those were cruel choices, and until you can name them specifically, honestly, there is nothing to discuss." I walked away before she could respond. The crowd had thinned somewhat, people beginning to drift toward the refreshments and the tours of the facility. I circulated among them, accepting handshakes and kind words, but part of my mind remained in that hallway, replaying my mother's non-apology, feeling the familiar disappointment of expecting change and receiving the same patterns. My father found me an hour later, catching me alone near the computer stations, while Luke was showing a group of children the murals he had painted. He approached hesitantly, his posture uncertain, so different from the authoritative figure he had tried to project in my office months ago. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I nodded, and we moved to a corner where we could speak without being overheard. "I know I was not always there for you," he began. His voice was softer than my mother's had been, more genuine in its uncertainty. Maybe I let your mother make too many of the decisions. Maybe I should have spoken up more, pushed back when things did not seem right. I am sorry for that, Caitlin. I am sorry I was not the father you deserved." The words were more sincere than anything my mother had offered. I could hear real regret in his voice, real recognition that something had gone wrong. But I had spent months examining the evidence, understanding the full scope of what had been done to me. And I knew something my father seemed to have forgotten: he was not a bystander. "Dad, you signed the papers." He blinked, confused. "What papers?" "The bank documents, when you closed Grandma's account, when you withdrew my inheritance. Your signature is on those forms right next to Mom's." I kept my voice calm, factual. "You knew about the scholarship too. You were there when the letters came. You lived in that house for 18 years while I was treated as less than. You watched and you did nothing. That is not being absent. That is participation." His face crumpled slightly, the defensive posture collapsing. I did not know how to stop her. You know how your mother is. When she makes up her mind about something, you were her co-conspirator, Dad. You just let her be the face of it. I felt no anger as I said this, only a weary clarity. Passivity is not innocence. Silence is not neutrality. You had choices every single day, and you chose to go along with what she wanted because it was easier than standing up for me. He had no response to this. He stood there, diminished and silent, confronting perhaps for the first time the full weight of his complicity. I did not wait for him to find words. There was nothing he could say that would change the past, and I was not sure there was anything he could do that would change the future. Molly approached me last near the end of the afternoon, when the crowd had largely dispersed, and the Fresh Start Center stood quiet and new in the September sunlight. She looked exhausted, wrung out, her eyes red from crying she had done somewhere out of sight. She did not ask to talk. She simply stood beside me, looking at the space that had once been her boutique, now transformed into something neither of us could have imagined a year ago. "I understand if you never trust me again," she said finally. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "I did not know everything I did not know about the scholarship until you said it in your speech, and I swear I did not know the full truth about Grandma's money until the lawsuit. But I knew enough to ask questions. I knew something was wrong with how you were treated. I knew, and I never said anything because it was easier not to." She turned to face me. "That is on me. I am not asking for anything. I am not asking for forgiveness or money or help. I just wanted you to know that I finally see it. All of it. And I am sorry." This was different. This was not a non-apology dressed in careful language, not a deflection of responsibility onto circumstances or other people. Molly was taking ownership of her choices, not completely. She still minimized her role by emphasizing what she did not know, but more genuinely than either of our parents had managed. "That is a start, Molly," I said quietly. "It is not enough yet. But it is a start." She nodded, accepting this assessment without argument. We stood together in silence for a long moment, two sisters surveying the wreckage and renewal of their shared history. I thought the opening would be the end of the story. Instead, it was the beginning of the hardest question I had ever faced. If they were willing to change, truly, change, could I accept it? And if they were not, could I walk away forever? 1 week after the grand opening, I requested a family meeting. Not at their house where the walls held too many painful memories. Not at mine where I needed to maintain sanctuary for Luke and myself. Instead, I chose Eleanor's home neutral ground with a trusted witness, a space where neither side held territorial advantage. Eleanor welcomed us into her living room with tea and silence settling into her armchair, like a benevolent judge presiding over proceedings she had long anticipated. My parents sat together on the sofa, my mother rigid with barely contained resentment, my father slumped in exhausted resignation. Molly took a chair apart from them, physically separating herself from the unit she had been part of her entire life. I remained standing, I had come prepared, and I wanted them to understand that this was not a negotiation between equals. This was the establishment of terms. If there is going to be any relationship between us going forward, I began, it will be on my conditions. These are not punishments. They are boundaries. You can accept them or not, but they are not negotiable. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I continued before she could interrupt. First, no financial requests or expectations, ever. Our economic relationship is finished. I will not fund your lifestyle, bail out your mistakes, or provide emergency assistance. If you need money, you will have to find it elsewhere. This is permanent. My father nodded slightly, accepting what he had already known was coming. My mother's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Second, Luke will be treated as an equal member of this family at every gathering. Same table, same treatment, same respect given to any other grandchild. If I ever see him excluded, dismissed, or assigned chores while other children play, we leave and we do not come back. Again, no argument. This condition was easy enough to agree to in principle, though I had doubts about their ability to maintain it in practice. Third, any attempt to circumvent my parental authority, including secret contact with Luke, showing up at his school, messaging him through gaming platforms, results in permanent estrangement. No second chances, no explanations, just done. My father flinched at the reference to his surveillance attempts. Good. He should flinch. Fourth, I paused, making sure I had their full attention. At the next family gathering, Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever comes first, you will publicly acknowledge that I funded the dinner that sparked this conflict, that grandmother's money was used for your benefit without my knowledge or consent, and that your treatment of both me and Luke was wrong. Not a detailed confession. Just simple acknowledgement that I have been unfairly treated, and you are working to do better. The silence that followed was absolute. Then my mother's face flushed a deep, angry red. You want us to humiliate ourselves in front of everyone, to stand up and confess like criminals? That is outrageous. That is... I want you to tell the truth once. I interrupted calmly. If telling the truth feels like humiliation, that is not my problem. It is yours. The next 20 minutes devolved into exactly what I had expected. My mother argued every point, seeking loopholes, attempting to soften language, proposing compromises that would allow her to maintain the fiction she had constructed. My father stayed silent, neither supporting nor opposing, retreating into the passive complicity that had defined his entire role in our family. It was Molly who finally broke the impasse. We will do it. Her voice cut through our mother's latest objection. All of it. Every condition. Exactly as Caitlin stated. My mother turned on her with fury. You do not speak for this family. Molly met her gaze without flinching. I am speaking for myself. I will do all of it. Every single thing she asked. Because I am tired of pretending we did not do exactly what she said we did. I am tired of lying to everyone, including ourselves. If you want to keep fighting, keep pretending, keep making excuses, that is your choice. But I am done. The room went still. In 42 years, Molly had never publicly contradicted our mother. She had been the obedient daughter, the golden child, the one who agreed and complied and never challenged the authority that had shaped her entire life. Watching her stand firm now, watching the power structure of our family shift visibly in that moment, I felt something unexpected pride in my sister. My mother looked between her two daughters, recognizing perhaps for the first time that she had lost control of both of us. Her mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Fine. She finally managed the word, forced through clenched teeth. Fine. We accept your conditions. My father nodded his agreement. Molly exhaled slowly, relief visible in the release of tension from her shoulders. We had terms for peace. We had agreement to try. Eleanor witnessed all of it, nodding her quiet approval, her presence ensuring that no one could later claim the conversation had not happened. I thought that was the end, the final piece of a puzzle that had taken 9 months to complete. But as everyone prepared to leave, Molly caught my arm and asked me something I never expected, something that would test whether I truly believed in second chances. Molly's request that day at Eleanor's house was simple: a job at the Fresh Start Center. Not management. Not a favor. An entry-level position helping other women navigate the same systems she was now learning to navigate herself. I struggled with the decision for days. My instinct was to refuse to keep my world separate, to protect the sanctuary I had built from the family that had caused so much damage. But I kept returning to Luke's words about hurt people hurting people. And I remembered Eleanor's wisdom about pity with boundaries, how hate without pity was cruelty, but pity without boundaries was self-destruction. I offered Molly a 3-month trial at minimum wage with the same expectations as any other employee. No special treatment. No accommodations for her history or her circumstances. If she wanted to work at the center, she would have to earn her place like everyone else. She accepted without hesitation. 1 month in, Molly has not missed a single shift. She arrives early, stays late, and throws herself into tasks with a determination I have never seen from her before. She teaches computer skills to women who remind her of herself. Women who built prisons without realizing it, who mistook control for love and dependency for security. Watching her connect with them, watching her share her own story as a cautionary tale, and a source of hope, I see glimpses of the sister I might have had if our mother had not spent decades turning us against each other. The family dinner following the grand opening was awkward. There is no point pretending otherwise. We gathered at my parents' house for a Sunday meal, the first time I had sat at that table since Christmas Eve. The tension was palpable, conversations, stilted silences, stretching uncomfortably long. But my father fulfilled the agreement. He stood before the meal, began, his hands trembling slightly, and spoke words he had clearly rehearsed. He acknowledged that I had funded the Christmas dinner that sparked this conflict. He acknowledged that grandmother's money had been used for their benefit without my knowledge. He acknowledged that their treatment of both me and Luke had been wrong, and that they were committed to doing better. It was stilted. It was clearly difficult for him. But he said it, and that mattered. My mother sat in rigid silence throughout his speech. She did not contradict him. She did not add her own words of acknowledgement. But she did not undermine him either, and for her, that was progress. Luke sat at the main table beside his cousins, who seemed genuinely pleased to see him. They talked about video games and school, and the murals he had painted at the center. No one suggested he belonged elsewhere. No one assigned him chores while other children played. It was not transformation. It was a single step on a very long journey. But for the first time in my life, I felt something other than dread at a family gathering. I felt possibility. The final revelation came from Eleanor. She called me one afternoon in late October, asking me to visit. When I arrived, she was sitting in her usual armchair with a yellowed envelope in her hands, addressed in handwriting. I recognized instantly my grandmother's careful script. "Your grandmother asked me to give this to you when you were ready," Eleanor said softly. "For 20 years I was not sure when that would be. After watching you this year, I know. You are ready now." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The letter inside was brief, just a single page, but every word was devastating in its love. My grandmother had known about my mother's sabotage even then. She had tried to intervene, tried to protect me, but had been shut out of her own daughter's family. She wrote about watching me from a distance, seeing my potential, grieving that she could not do more to nurture it. The final paragraph destroyed me. "They tried to make you small because they were afraid of how bright you would shine. But I always knew the truth, my darling girl. You were meant to be extraordinary. And now you finally know it too." I cried for the grandmother I had lost, and the grandmother I had found again through these words. I cried for the 16-year-old girl who had believed she inherited nothing, never knowing how much love had been set aside for her. I cried for everything that was stolen and everything that was reclaimed. I framed my grandmother's letter and hung it in the Fresh Start Center, where every woman who walks through those doors can read it. because her message was never just for me. It was for everyone who was ever told they were not enough. Some families break you. Some families build you. The wisest among us learn to break the patterns and build something new. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is not destruction. It is rebuilding your life so beautifully that even those who doubted you cannot look away. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, they learn to rebuild too. This is not the end of my story, but it is finally the beginning of the life I was always meant to live. Thank you for staying with me until the end of Caitlin's incredible journey. Her story reminds us that we are never defined by those who tried to break us. We are defined by how we choose to rebuild. If this story touched your heart, if you saw yourself in Caitlin's struggles, or if you know someone who needs to hear that they deserve better, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one. I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who treated you unfairly? Do you believe Caitlin made the right choice by giving Molly a second chance? What would you have done differently? Share your thoughts, share your own experiences, and most importantly, share this story with someone who might need it today. Your engagement helps us bring more stories of strength, resilience, and hope to this community. Until next time, remember, you are enough. You have always been enough, and no one can take that truth away from you.